Chapter 2154. The young man, who seemed to be in his 30s, said, "Our Taoist sect of divine sound was once renowned throughout the saints' world because of the third ancestor. However, after the third ancestor's death, our Taoist sect of divine sound declined. Our current status is not even 10 or 20% of what it was in the past. Mu-er, your appearance has brought hope to our Taoist sect of divine sound, allowing us to see the day when our Taoist sect of divine sound becomes renowned in the saints' world again. All of this is because you have obtained the third ancestor's legacy. However, if you want to inherit the third ancestor's legacy completely, the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry needs to be awakened. Then, you can inherit the third ancestor's legacy completely from the artifact spirit. As a result, awakening the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry is of utmost importance to both you and the entire Taoist sect of divine sound." The man sighed gently when he reached there. He said helplessly, "It's just that our Taoist sect of divine sound doesn't have anything that can awaken the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry. The only method we can think of right now is to go to the Tsang Poseidon Palace." Mua, the third ancestor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace, the woman who seemed to be in her 30s, looked at Shangguan Mu-er and said, "The Tsang Poseidon Palace opens once every 10,000 years, and right now, it just happens to be when the Tsang Poseidon Palace opens. Originally, we planned on taking you to the Tsang Poseidon Palace the next time it opens. We believe that with your talent and the full support of our Taoist sect of divine sound, we'll be able to raise your strength to the level of the Divine King within 10,000 years. You'll have no worries in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. However, plans can't keep up with changes. Now that the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace has awakened, the Tsang Poseidon Palace is about to choose a new master. As a result, this might be the last time that the Tsang Poseidon Palace opens. You can't miss this opportunity. Ancestor, do you want me to go to the Tsang Poseidon Palace right now?" Shangguan Mu-er asked. "That's right. The Neptunian Divine Palace only opens for a very short amount of time each time. In order for you to make it in time, you need to use a teleportation formation that can take you across planes," Jianshun said. Afterwards, she said to the other two ancestors, Lian Shi, Guna, "The two of you should know just how important Mu-er is to our Taoist sect of divine sound. I'll leave the two of you to escort her to the Tsang Poseidon Palace this time. Moreover, the opening of the Tsang Poseidon Palace this time will be different from the past. There will definitely be many supreme prodigies in there. Although Mu-er has already reached the level of the Divine King under the nurturing of our Taoist sect of divine sound, there's still a huge difference between her and those supreme prodigies. As a result, we'll need Jun Kong to be responsible for Mu-er's safety in there." Jun Kong immediately beamed with joy when he heard that. He said in a hurry, "Please don't worry, Master and Ancestor. I'll definitely do my best to protect Junior Mu-er in the Tsang Poseidon Palace." "Yeah, with Jun Kong, we don't need to worry too much about Mu-er's safety in the Tsang Poseidon Palace," said the man in his 30s. He was Lian Shi, as well as Jun Kong's master. He was one of the four ancestors of the Taoist sect of divine sound. "There's no time to lose. Let's set off right now." Guna stood up and glanced at Lian Shi warmly before the four of them immediately left. At the same time, in a gloomy space that never saw the light of day, the environment was extremely horrible. Swamps were everywhere, and poisonous insects roamed about. There were also abnormally powerful magical beasts and creatures of various races that appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Bloody battles could be seen everywhere. At this moment, a blood-soaked young man was engaged in an intense battle with a 100-meter-tall, golden-haired, huge ape in a dense forest. Their battle was extremely intense. Every clash was like the collision of two huge meteors. With deafening booms, terrifying ripples of energy were kicked out. Every time they struck out, they would be accompanied by overwhelming origin energy, causing the surroundings to collapse. The huge ape was also covered in blood. Its thick, golden fur had already been dyed red. It roared out furiously as it struck out time and time again, engaging in a battle to the death with the young man. The battle lasted for several hours. In the end, the young man's sword pierced the golden ape's forehead with a strand of sword chi. Only then did the battle end. After the battle, the young man knelt on one knee as he gasped for breath. He murmured, "I never thought that the ancient great apes would be so powerful. It's just a young gold king at the same cultivation level, yet it's so difficult to deal with. I really wonder just how terrifying dark gold kings are." It's already very impressive that you could defeat a gold king of the ancient great apes. As for dark gold kings, it's impossible for you to be their opponent unless you're in the top 10 of the divine king's throne. That's because the bloodline of dark gold kings of the ancient great apes is only second to the bloodline of warring gods. At this moment, a woman's voice rang out of nowhere, reverberating through the entire world. With that, the gloomy world that never saw the light of day suddenly began to distort violently. The entire world actually began to blur at a visible rate before disappearing in the end. It was replaced by a huge, empty space. To no surprise, the blood-soaked young man stood in the huge space. Around him was an unimaginably colossal formation. Every single inscription that made up the formation shone brightly, shining like stars. However, the pulses of energy within were so powerful that they were enough to destroy the world. Even the saints' world, this was a formation that stood at the very peak. The gloomy world and the golden great ape from before were all conjured by the formation. Even though the world was illusory, the battle was real. As a result, the blood on the young man truly flowed from his body, and his wounds were real as well. It's just a pity that a dark gold king of the ancient great apes hasn't appeared for several million years already. The woman's voice rang out again. Her voice was filled with pity. This time, her voice was no longer vague and elusive. Instead, it rang out clearly behind the young man. A few hundred meters behind the young man, there was a woman in her 20s wearing a long red dress. She stood there silently. Although the woman seemed like a mortal without any ripples of cultivation, her temperament was extraordinary. She had a beauty that could outshine the moon and put flowers to shame. The young man, whose body was covered in blood and wounds, turned to look at the woman. He chuckled and cupped his hands at the woman in red. "Greetings, 8th senior sister. Although you were sent up by Senior Bishing, you still haven't formally become my disciple, so you can't be considered my junior brother yet. Pack up immediately. Master wants to see you," the woman said to the young man before turning around and leaving. "Master wants to see me?" The young man blinked when he heard that. He thought to himself, "I've been here for so long, yet I've never seen Master. Let alone Master, I haven't seen a third person aside from that old man Bishing and 8th senior sister. Moreover, that old man Bishing can't even be called a person. He's just an artifact spirit. However, that old man Bishing always brags about how powerful Master is, yet I've never seen Master before. Now I can finally see Master with my own eyes. If Master really is as powerful as that old man Bishing says, it shouldn't be difficult for Master to send me back." Chapter 2155. Before long, the young man had changed into a clean set of clothes. He wore a snow-white robe as he muttered to himself as he followed behind the woman in red. As for his injuries, they had miraculously healed in that short amount of time. He had completely recovered. The two of them remained silent along the way. In the end, the young man arrived in a majestic hall under the woman's lead. As soon as he entered the hall, the young man's heart suddenly shuddered. He studied the hall as a sliver of sternness appeared on his face. At this moment, he felt like he had arrived in an extremely vast universe as he stood in the hall. It actually made him feel insignificant. At the same time, an invisible pressure seemed to impact his soul, causing it to tremble uncontrollably. Disciple by Roan greets Master. At this moment, the woman in red knelt down and bowed. Her voice was filled with respect. As for the young man, as soon as he entered the hall, his mind seemed to have been taken away by the vast and majestic aura of the hall. He fell into a state of shock and absent-mindedness. Only when the woman in red's voice rang out did he suddenly come back to his senses, and he immediately looked over with rapt attention. A figure sat on a throne at the very front of the hall. He radiated with the dense light of laws, causing space to distort. As a result, it was impossible to see his true appearance. Even his body seemed blurry and hazy. This was the first thing the young man saw. Just as he was about to continue looking curiously, he suddenly felt a piercing pain in his eyes, causing him to involuntarily close his eyes. Soon after, as if his body was out of his control, he directly knelt down. This caused the young man to be incomparably shocked. Disciple Ming Dong greets Master. The young man knelt on the ground with his head lowered. He no longer dared to raise his head to look at the person on the throne. He felt fear from the depths of his heart as he faced the person on the throne. Even his soul trembled. He had a strong feeling that even though his current strength was not weak, the figure sitting on the throne did not even need to make a move. Just a look was enough to destroy his body and soul. To no surprise, the young man was Ming Dong, who had entered the 9th floor of the Inata Tower with Jianshan before being sent to the Saint's World by the projection of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. After arriving in the Saint's World, Ming Dong understood that the reason why he had been teleported back was all because of the artifact spirit of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. Although the artifact spirit of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing was in the distant Saint's World, it was connected to the projection on the 9th floor of the Inata Tower. After sensing Ming Dong's talent, it acted on its own accord and drained the projection's power to bring Ming Dong over from the Tian Yuan continent. Ming Dong, I have yet to accept you as my disciple. It's too early for you to call me master. The figure on the throne spoke. His voice seemed to have fused with all the music in the world, making it impossible to tell whether he was male or female. All he could sense was an icy cold indifference. However, you do indeed possess extraordinary talent for the laws of destruction. You've comprehended the laws of destruction to such a level in such a short amount of time. You have the right to become my disciple, the figure continued. His voice was emotionless, but it was filled with supreme dignity. I, the Inata Grand Prime, formally accept you as my disciple today. Ming Dong, are you willing to accept me as your master? Disciple is willing. Disciple Ming Dong greets master. Ming Dong said politely. From today onwards, you will be my 9th disciple. You will inherit my laws of destruction. Whether you can comprehend it to the limit will be up to your luck. As the Inata Grand Prime said that, he extended a finger and a streak of light immediately shot into Ming Dong's forehead. Ming Dong shuddered, and he could not help but close his eyes. The streak of light contained an extremely vast amount of information. Even with the current strength of Ming Dong's soul, he struggled to digest it all in a short amount of time. After who knew how long, Ming Dong finally opened his eyes slowly. He looked at the hazy figure of the Inata Grand Prime and hesitated for a while before making up his mind. Master, disciple has a request. Disciple knows that master is resourceful. So I hope master can send disciple back to my original world because disciple has a close friend who has gone through thick and thin with me. Disciple hopes to bring that brother of mine to the Saint's World as well. I hope master can fulfill my request. The brother you speak of is already in the Saint's World. If you want to find him, go to the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Byron, take 9th Junior away, said the Inata Grand Prime. Yes, master, Byron replied politely before leaving with Ming Dong politely. Ming Dong, on the other hand, became dazed. Disbelief remained on his face. He had done everything he could to return to the Tian Yuan continent to find Jianshan, but he had never thought that he would receive the shocking news that Jianshan had already arrived in the Saint's World from his master. 8th Senior, how does master know who my brother is? And how does he know that my brother has already arrived in the Saint's World? And how does he know so clearly? All right, what kind of place is the Tsang Poseidon Palace? Ming Dong looked at Byron in confusion after leaving the hall. Byron's expression did not change at all. She said calmly, Master's level of cultivation has already reached an unbelievable level. He's the sovereign of a world, an existence akin to the laws of the world. With a single thought, he can see through the mysteries of the world and peer into the past, present, and future. It's obviously extremely simple for him to find out where your brother is. Huh? That's so powerful. In other words, across the entire Saint's World, or even the countless lower worlds, Doesn't that mean Master can find someone with a single thought, no matter how far away they are, even if they're separated by thousands of miniature worlds? Ming Dong asked in shock. That's true for some weaker existences. However, if they're grand primes, it'll be extremely difficult for Master to find them with his abilities because experts at that level already have methods to hide their tracks, said Byron. After formally becoming a disciple, Ming Dong's status was completely different from before. Byron answered all of his questions to the best of her ability. However, Ming Dong also learned an extremely shocking piece of news from Byron. 4 of the Inata Grand Prime's 9 disciples were already dead. Only his 1st senior sister, 3rd senior brother, 5th senior sister, and 8th senior sister remained. 8th senior sister, may I ask where the Tsang Poseidon Palace is? Ming Dong asked. As soon as he thought about how Jianshan was in the Tsang Poseidon Palace, he could not help but become excited. He wanted to see Jianshan immediately. Chapter 2156. Jianshan floated on the 8th floor of the Neptunian Divine Palace in a lava that was hot enough to melt low-quality god artifacts. His entire body was covered by the scorching lava as he slowly sank towards the bottom of the lava. Jianshan had completely lost consciousness at this moment. He was unconscious, so he had no idea that he was facing an unprecedented danger. The lava there was just too terrifying. It could even melt tough god artifacts, let alone Jianshan's body. Even though his chaotic body had reached the 12th layer, even if he pushed the defenses of the chaotic body to the limit, it would only be equivalent to a supreme quality saint artifact at most. Naturally, he was unable to protect himself in the lava. Not to mention, he was unconscious right now. His body was not filled with chaotic force, so he had not pushed the defenses of the chaotic body to the limit. As a result, his body had not reached its peak at all. As a result, in less than 3 seconds after he fell into the lava, his body had been charred black. All his skin had cracked. 5 seconds after Jianshan fell into the lava, his body began to melt away bit by bit. It had been reduced to ashes, fusing with the lava. Moreover, as time passed bit by bit, Jianshan's body melted faster and faster. At this rate, Jianshan's entire body would probably be reduced to nothingness in less than 10 seconds. His soul would be wiped out in the end. At this moment, Jianshan was in great danger. If he was conscious, he might have had a chance at escaping from the lava with the toughness of the chaotic body. However, he just happened to be unconscious. At this critical moment, the damaged Inata Tower appeared near Jianshan. It rapidly approached Jianshan. Afterwards, Kea, who had been forcefully thrown into the Inata Tower by Jianshan, suddenly flew out of the Inata Tower with a barrier of energy around her. She headed straight for Jianshan. As soon as Kea left the Inata Tower, the barrier of energy around her immediately dimmed. It only lasted for a while before showing signs of shattering. However, Kea moved extremely quickly. When the barrier of energy around her shattered, she had already successfully carried Jianshan's scorching body and entered the Inata Tower with a flash. At that moment, if Jianshan was still conscious, he would definitely be extremely surprised. This was because Kaya actually did not need his permission at all as the half-owner of the Inata Tower. She could move about freely in the Inata Tower. Kaya gently placed Jianshan on the ground on the 1st floor of the Inata Tower. When Jianshan's body came in contact with the ground, the rock below him immediately began to melt, forming a small pool of scorching lava. Jianshan had just emerged from the lava, so he naturally still possessed the terrifying heat from the lava. It was enough to melt the tough rock into liquid form. A sliver of worry appeared in Kaya's eyes as she looked at Jianshan's wounds. After a moment of thought, she took out several god-tier heavenly resources from her space ring. She ground a portion of them into powder before gently sprinkling it on Jianshan. She directly fed the other portion into Jianshan's mouth. The effects of god-tier heavenly resources were obviously unquestionable. Jianshan's wounds immediately healed at a visible rate. His charred skin gradually regained some of its normal color. This time, Jianshan's wounds were extremely severe. Even after using several god-tier heavenly resources and the supreme recovery of his chaotic body, It still took him 3 whole days to make a full recovery. Even though his wounds had healed, Jianshun did not wake up. He remained unconscious. Ziyun and Xiaoman had arrived by Jianshun's side long ago. They looked at the unconscious Jianshun with deep worry. Big brother is fine. Why hasn't he woken up yet? Xiaoman crouched beside Jianshun and said in low spirits, "He's fine now. It's just that there's something wrong with his soul, so he should be unconscious for a few days." Kea looked at Jianshun and said softly, "Ziyun will remember the kindness of my 2 benefactors. If there's an opportunity in the future, Ziyun will definitely repay you." Ziyun bowed deeply towards Kea and said solemnly. She was filled with gratitude. This time, Jianshun remained unconscious for a very long time. He only woke up after half a month. As soon as he opened his eyes, he felt a slight, piercing pain from his soul. "Ah, big brother, you've finally woken up. Fantastic, fantastic. Sister Ziyun, Sister Kea, big brother has woken up." Xiaoman's voice rang out in Jianshun's ears as soon as possible. She was filled with excitement and joy. There was no need for her to remind him. The moment Jianshun opened his eyes, Ziyun and Kea sensed him and made their way over. Jianshun slowly sat up. He looked around in confusion, but soon after, everything that had happened before he fainted flashed through his head. He clearly remembered how he had been surrounded by the Divine King and how the evil power had appeared in the end. Jianshun had no idea what had happened after he lost his mind and fell under the control of the evil power. "Are we safe now?" Jianshun looked at Kea and slowly stood up. As soon as he steadied himself, he swayed and felt dizzy, almost causing him to fall to the ground. Kea immediately supported Jianshun. He asked in concern, "Jianshun, are you all right?" Jianshun gently shook his head. "I'm fine. My soul is a little injured. This should have been caused by the evil power. We're currently in the tower. The tower has already sunk to the bottom of the lava, so it's impossible for the people above to come down. There's no issue with safety. You should heal up here first," said Kea. "Benefactor, I have some pills here that can heal injuries to the primordial spirit. Take them quickly." Ziyun immediately passed a jade bottle to Jianshun. The jade bottle contained a god-tier pill for healing the soul. The pill had been left behind by a chaotic prime of the Taoist sect of Neptunia in the past. She had obtained the chaotic prime's legacy, so she naturally obtained everything from him. Chapter 21:57. The amethyst spiritual bamboo came from the Xianhuang microcosm in the lower sea realm. It was one of the heavenly resources that could heal the soul. Its effects were extremely powerful. Coupled with the fact that the amethyst spiritual bamboo grew in the Xianhuang microcosm and was constantly contaminated by Xianhuang qi, it possessed some Xianhuang qi to a certain extent. As a result, the effects of the amethyst spiritual bamboo were strengthened even further. As a result, even though the amethyst spiritual bamboo in Jianshun's possession was not of a particularly high grade, so its effects on Divine King experts should not be particularly obvious. However, when Jianshun dripped 2 droplets of sap into his forehead, his injured soul recovered in a very short amount of time. "I've finally used up all the amethyst spiritual bamboo I obtained in the Xianhuang microcosm." Jianshun slowly opened his eyes. He had already recovered from his injuries after being unconscious for half a month. Now that his soul had recovered as well, he had returned to his peak condition. However, there was not the slightest trace of happiness on his face. Instead, he was frowning with worry on his face. After the battle last time, he had deeply sensed that the backlash from the evil power was becoming more and more powerful. Although he could still suppress the evil power with its current strength, once the power of his soul became too exhausted or too heavily injured, the evil power hidden in his soul could launch a counterattack at any time. Even the secret warnings from the sword spirits were useless. However, what made him feel helpless was that even though he had reached the level of Divine King, he still had not found a way to completely resolve this problem. This was because the evil power had already fused with his soul. It had basically become a part of his soul. Removing it was easier said than done. At this moment, Kea arrived before Jianshun. Looking at the worried Jianshun, he seemed to know what was on Jianshun's mind. He said, "Jianshun, don't worry too much. There are quite a few supreme divine kings in Poseidon Palace. They come from various peak organizations in the Saints world, so what they know is not something regular divine kings can compare to. Perhaps they know some ancient methods that can completely resolve the problem with your soul. With our current situation, it'll probably be difficult for us to get along with those supreme divine kings, unless we hand Xiao Man over. Whatever, let's not talk about this. There's no point in worrying about the problem with my soul. Let's go take a look at the world at the bottom of the lava. I hope it won't disappoint me too much. Jianchen stood up, and the gloominess on his face vanished in a single instance. He smiled freely, and with a thought, he controlled the power of the Inata Tower to send him and Kea to the exit. The exit of the Inata Tower was a damaged door. It was so damaged that it did not even need to be opened to allow people to enter and exit freely. It was even possible to see the boiling lava outside, clearly from within the door. Of course, Jianchen knew that this was only on the surface. The Inata Tower was an extremely high-quality god artifact, after all, let alone the fact that the door was damaged. Even if it had vanished, no one would be able to enter the Inata Tower without his permission. Even the lava that filled every inch of the space outside was unable to seep in through the door. The lava here is far too powerful. With the current strength of my soul, it's impossible for me to expand beyond the lava. It looks like I need to go outside personally. Jianchen frowned slightly and said sternly. He understood extremely well just how terrifying the lava outside was. Even if he pushed the defenses of the chaotic body to the limit, he would not be able to last for too long. You have to be careful. This is the very bottom of the lava. The lava is so hot that it's much hotter than the surface. With the toughness of your body, you might be able to last for a while on the surface, but you'll probably only be able to last for a few seconds, or even less at the bottom, Kea said from beside Jianchen. He was extremely cautious and slightly worried. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I don't want to lose my life here. Jianchen glanced at Kea to reassure him. He was filled with confidence. The lava at the bottom was indeed terrifying, but it was impossible for it to kill him in a single instance, where he would not even have the time to flee. Jianchen sucked in a deep breath and silently circulated the chaotic body. He pushed the defenses of the chaotic body to the limit before protecting himself with light. After making sufficient preparations, he left the Inata Tower in a flash and entered the scorching lava outside. Jianchen, you have to be careful. Don't go too far. If you can't last any longer, come back immediately. Don't force yourself, Kea said from behind. At the same time, she had made preparations to charge out without any hesitation as soon as Jianchen encountered danger. As soon as he left the Inata Tower, an indescribably terrifying heat surged over. In just a single instance, the light around Jianchen dimmed. In less than half a second, it shattered. What a terrifying lava. If this lava was placed outside, I'm afraid that even the void wouldn't be able to withstand the high temperature and would shatter. The bottom of the lava really does have the ability to melt god artifacts. Only a high-quality god artifact like the Azure Poseidon Palace can easily endure the terrifying heat here. Jianchen was secretly surprised. The moment the light around him shattered, the scorching lava was already close to his body. Immediately, he felt a bone-gnawing pain, causing Jianchen's body to tremble slightly. However, the pain was no different from scratching an itch compared to the torment he felt when his body was being tempered every time his chaotic body broke through. He endured it easily. However, in the next moment, Jianchen's body suddenly stiffened. This stiffening lasted for less than a split second before he began to tremble again. He did not tremble because of the terrifying heat. Instead, he trembled because of the great joy and excitement in his heart. Jianchen was unable to expand the senses of his soul at the bottom of the lava, so his vision was limited. He could only see 100 meters away. However, all he could see within that range were fiery red crystals of various sizes that basically covered the entire ground. Jianchen was naturally familiar with these crystals. They were extremely valuable fire divine crystals. If he were to compare fire divine crystals of the same size to divine crystals, a single fire divine crystal would be 10 times more valuable than a supreme-grade divine crystal. However, there were so many fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava that they were like rocks hidden in a riverbed. They covered the entire ground, forming a thick layer. There were simply too many to count. Jinshin's breathing could not help but become heavy. Great joy filled his heart. What was his objective in coming to the Azure Poseidon Palace? It was not for the legacy, nor was it for the treasures. His main objective was to obtain enough wealth for him to use the interplanar teleportation formation to return to the Cloud Plane and head to the Taoist sect of Divine Sound and the Ice Goddess Hall. The Taoist sect of Divine Sound had his wife, Shengguan Mu'er. The Ice Goddess Hall had his second sister, Changyang Mingwei, whom he had not seen in many years. There was even the heavenly palace of Bishing that the Anita Grand Prime resided in. This was because Ming Dong had been brought to the Saints' World by the heavenly palace of Bishing back when he was still on the Tianyuan continent. Traveling to these different planes required tremendous amounts of divine crystals. Only then could he reach them in the shortest amount of time possible. Otherwise, he would have to use a spatial battleship, which would take him several thousand years or even several tens of thousand years to reach his destination. Jinshin could not afford to wait that long, so he needed to use the interplanar teleportation formation. However, Jinshin saw hope in reuniting with his wife, Shengguan Mu or his sister, and Ming Dong with so many fire divine crystals. Chapter 21:58. Without any hesitation, Jinshin immediately began to collect the fire divine crystals. He stabbed his hands into the fire divine crystals on the ground and entered the Anita Tower in a flash with some of them. Jinshin appeared out of nowhere in the Anita Tower. He tossed the fire divine crystals to the ground before immediately sitting down. He began to circulate chaotic force to heal his wounds. He had only stayed outside for 5 breaths this time. However, in that short period of time, his body had already suffered significant injuries from the terrifyingly high temperature of the lava. Cracks had appeared all over his skin, and it was scorched red. Naturally, his clothes had been reduced to ashes as soon as possible. As a result, Jinshin was completely naked right now. Kaya stood beside Jinshin. She looked at the naked Jinshin, and her face became rather unnatural. She gently clicked her tongue and took out a set of clothes from her space ring to cover Jinshin. Afterwards, she looked at the fire divine crystals Jinshin had brought in. There were not a lot of fire divine crystals, only 8 of them. However, every single one of them was the size of a fist and gave off a fiery presence. Extremely pure and tremendous energy flowed within them. It looks like there really are quite a lot of fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava, thought Kaya. Her eyes lit up as she became rather excited. Jinshin's wounds healed particularly quickly as he circulated his chaotic force to heal. In just 6 hours, he was back to normal. Jinshin, how's the situation outside? Kaya immediately asked after Jinshin finished healing. Although she was no weaker than Jinshin, her body was not as tough as Jinshin's, so she did not dare to go out carelessly. As a result, she had no idea what was going on outside. You really haven't let me down. There really are a lot of fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava. However, I need to think of a way to collect them all. I won't be able to collect a lot with just my 2 hands. Jinshin smiled. Jinshin smiled. The temperature at the bottom of the lava was just too high, so he did not dare to take his space ring out. As a result, he needed to think of another method to collect the fire divine crystals. Jinshin sank into his thoughts before taking out the primordial god silk from his space ring. The primordial god silk had already snapped in 2 when he faced the crisis of the world. However, even though it was damaged, it had still been refined by Jinshin, so the length of the primordial god silk could be changed according to his will. With a thought, Jinshin immediately controlled one of the strands of primordial god silk to weave a piece of armor for himself, while the other strand of primordial god silk turned into a huge golden net with a thought. According to the sword spirits, the primordial god silk can be refined into extremely powerful treasures of the world, but refining such a powerful treasure will obviously require many high-quality materials. Moreover, There's an extremely harsh requirement on the ability of the refiner, Jinshin said. As a result, I obviously can't refine the primordial god silk into a treasure of the world with my current ability. However, the primordial god silk is of high grade after all. It shouldn't be melted so easily at the bottom of the lava, Jinshin thought. He left the Enata Tower in a flash with a huge golden net in his hand and the Enata Tower in the blink of an eye. Jinshin paid close attention to the primordial god silk as soon as he arrived at the bottom of the lava outside the Enata Tower. He did not want something as precious as the primordial god silk to be damaged again. However, Jinshin stopped worrying very soon. As soon as the primordial god silk appeared in the lava, it immediately shone with a faint golden light. The power of divinity circulated within it, preventing the terrifyingly high temperatures from harming the primordial god silk at all. The primordial god silk really is powerful. It can actually endure so easily in a place where even god artifacts can be melted. Probably only the evil power of the crisis of the world that can devour all things can damage the primordial god silk, Jinshin thought. Jinshin made up his mind. With a wave of his hand, he immediately cast out the net in his hand, trapping a region of fire divine crystals. Afterwards, he suddenly pulled out a large pile of fire divine crystals. At the same time, 5 seconds had passed. Jinshin's body had reached the limit of what it could endure. Without any hesitation, he dragged the large pile of fire divine crystals with the net and returned to the Enata Tower as quickly as he could. The golden armor he wore could not be regarded as a defensive treasure. The scorching lava at the bottom of the lava could still seep in through the cracks and injure Jinshin's body. As a result, even with the primordial god silk, Jinshin could only remain outside for 5 seconds. His life would be in danger once he exceeded this time limit. Jinshin shook his hand and removed the golden net from the Enata Tower. Immediately, a large pile of fire divine crystals that flickered with red light piled up on the ground. There were so many of them that there were several hundred of them. The larger ones were the size of a fist, while the smaller ones were only the size of a thumb. The harvest this time was over 100 times greater than last time. Kea became stunned when she saw so many fire divine crystals. Although she had learnt from Jinshin that there were many fire divine crystals outside, she had never thought that there would be so many. Jinshin had only been gone for 5 seconds, yet he had already collected so many. Afterwards, Jinshin began to collect the fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava without any regard for exhaustion. Every time he went out, he would only remain for 5 seconds. Once he returned, he would need several hours to heal. He repeated this over and over again, allowing him to collect a large number of fire divine crystals every day. Jinshin had basically forgotten about Ziyun and Xiaoman, who were still in the Enata Tower. He seemed to be especially busy during the days he collected fire divine crystals. He was completely focused on the matter of the fire divine crystals, so much so that he did not even have the time to talk to Kea, who always stayed by his side to watch over him. While Jinshin was busy collecting fire divine crystals, the Cerulean Poseidon Palace was not peaceful. Many large organizations in the Saints' world had already learnt that the artifact spirit of the Cerulean Poseidon Palace had awakened. So many divine kings who did not care about the legacies in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace used teleportation formations from various places in the Saints' world to gather in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace. The sudden appearance of a large number of unfamiliar faces in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace made the cultivators who had entered the Cerulean Poseidon Palace feel like a storm was brewing. They could already smell blood, so all the cultivators secretly became cautious. They all felt threatened. Strange. Why have so many people suddenly appeared in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace? I feel like there are more than 10 times more people than before. Where did so many Neptunian medallions come from? The arrival of these people is probably related to the appearance of the Neptunian moon. As for the Neptunian medallions, a few peak organizations can replicate them a long time ago. After all, the Neptunian medallion hasn't been updated for several million years. Discussions like this could be heard everywhere in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace. However, whenever people mentioned these matters, they would become stern. None of the people who had suddenly appeared in the cerulean Poseidon Palace were simple. There were many supreme divine kings among them. This made many of the divine kings and some of the regular divine kings in the cerulean Poseidon Palace feel extremely pressured. At this moment, on the first floor of the cerulean Poseidon Palace, a white-robed young man with an imposing appearance looked around excitedly. There was even some undisguised eagerness in his eyes. Chapter 21:59. Behind the young man were 5 guards in golden armor. Their golden helmets covered their faces, making it impossible for anyone to see their appearances. They gave off a sense of mystery. There were also many divine king realm experts gathered in groups of 3 to 5 around the young man. However, basically all of their gazes were gathered in the direction of the white-robed young man, or more accurately, they were gathered on the 5 guards behind the young man. They all showed fear. The white-robed young man ignored the gazes in the surroundings. He smiled warmly and said, "Let's go. Let's go up and ask around. These people have just come in from outside, so there's no point in asking them." As the white-clothed young man spoke and laughed, he had already left at lightning speed. Behind him, the 5 golden-armored guards followed closely. Am I seeing things? The 5 people in golden armor seemed to be divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing. It can't be wrong. The divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing all wear standard armor. They have the insignia of the heavenly palace of Bishing on them. No one dares to copy them. Without a doubt, they are divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing. But that doesn't make sense. Why would a supreme existence like the heavenly palace of Bishing send divine generals to the Tsang, Poseidon Palace? I don't believe that the heavenly palace of Bishing is interested in the Tsang, Poseidon Palace. It's obvious that the 5 divine generals follow the young man's lead. But who is the young man? Is he the disciple of one of the majesties of the heavenly palace of Bishing? After the young man left, a heated discussion immediately broke out at the entrance to the first floor of the Tsang, Poseidon Palace. The young man was actually protected by divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing, which attracted everyone's attention. Even the supreme divine king among them became cautious. It doesn't matter who the young man is. We can't afford to make him our enemy. Even though the ancestor once said that the Anita Grand Exalt died over 3 million years ago, the heavenly palace of Bishing still has a few majesties supporting it. Apart from the 8th majesty, any one of the 3 remaining majesties are not people that our ancestor can provoke. They can destroy our clan with just a flick of their fingers. At this moment, many divine kings communicated with their people secretly. Even some supreme divine kings warned the people beside them sternly. To no surprise, the white-robed young man that everyone discussed was Ming Dong, who had specially come to the Tsang, Poseidon Palace in search of Jianshan. At this moment, Ming Dong wandered around the Tsang, Poseidon Palace with the 5 divine generals. Whenever he came across people, he would go up to ask about Jianshan, regardless of their cultivation. Jianshan? You've never heard of him? Brother, I've only come to the Tsang, Poseidon Palace recently, so I really don't know who Jianshan is. Why don't you leave a method of communication with me? Once I have any news about Jianshan, I'll contact you immediately. Ming Dong asked a few people in a row, but the results were very clear. The people he met had all come to the Tsang, Poseidon Palace after him. They had not come here much earlier than him, so they naturally did not know about Jianshan. All the people stopped by Ming Dong became extremely polite when they saw the unique attire of the 5 divine generals and the insignia of the heavenly palace of Bishing. They did not dare to slack off at all. The heavenly palace of Bishing was indeed too far away from the cultivators who struggled at the bottom. Some of them did not even have the right to know about the heavenly palace of Bishing. However, the heavenly palace of Bishing was not unfamiliar to the disciples of peak organizations. There's no one on the lower floors. It looks like I have to go up a few more floors, Ming Dong murmured to himself. Then he looked at the 5 divine generals behind him and said, "Your armor is just too dazzling. Although I've come to the Tsang, Poseidon Palace this time, to look for my brother, Jianshan, 8th senior sister has arranged a training mission for me at the same time. If you continue to wear this armor, I won't be able to train. Put it away." Don't wear it unless it's a life or death situation. Yes, Ninth Majesty. The 5 divine generals replied together. They all put away their golden armor and revealed their original appearances. The 5 of them all appeared to be middle-aged men. They were all emotionless, and their gazes were extremely cold. Every single one of them had gone through countless battles. They were vicious people who had emerged from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Without their golden armor, no one could recognize them as divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing. Afterwards, Ming Dong led the 5 divine generals through the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Only when they arrived on the 9th floor did he finally stop a passing divine king. He clasped his fist politely and asked, "Sir, have you heard a person called Jianshun?" Jianshun? But a handsome young man who only seems to be in his 20s? The laws of the sword he comprehended? The divine king was surprised and replied with a question. Yes. It's him. It's him. If you know Jianshun's whereabouts, please tell me. I will definitely thank you greatly. Ming Dong immediately became excited. He had been separated from Jianshun for so many years, and now that they were finally going to meet again in a foreign land, he struggled to remain calm. He became extremely excited. Jianshun is dead. Nothing remains of him. You can stop dreaming if you want to find him, the divine king said indifferently. He ignored Ming Dong and directly left. Ming Dong's smile suddenly froze. His excitement seemed to freeze in that moment. His heart stopped beating, and his blood stopped flowing. The divine king's words exploded in Ming Dong's head like a bolt from the blue. It reverberated through his head, stunning him. Jianshun is dead. He's already dead. Ming Dong murmured softly, as if he had lost his soul in that moment. However, that only lasted for a moment. In the next moment, his gaze suddenly became extremely sharp and terrifying. A presence as vast as the ocean radiated from him. Impossible, this is impossible, this is absolutely impossible. Ming Dong roared out furiously. He caught up to the divine king in a flash. He no longer acted as gracefully as before. He directly grabbed the divine king by his clothes and lifted him up. He roared out, "What did you just say? You're lying to me, right? You're lying to me, right? Tell me. You're lying to me. You're lying to me." Ming Dong seemed to have lost his mind. Just a moment ago, he was still imagining the beautiful scene and joy of reuniting with Jianshun. However, in the next moment, he heard that Jianshun was dead. The huge difference was a huge blow to him. He struggled to accept it. The divine king was immobilized by Ming Dong's presence. He could not help but pale in fright. He said with a trembling voice, "Senior, I only heard about Jianshun's death through hearsay. I didn't see it with my own eyes. Perhaps what I heard was fake. You must be lying to me. My brother can't have died here." Ming Dong roared out furiously and tossed the divine king far away. He immediately stopped a second divine king nearby and asked the same question. "Sai, Jianshun really is dead. I saw that battle clearly from nearby. There were a total of 8 divine kings who attacked him together. Jianshun fought against them with his cultivation as an early divine king. In the end, he died on the 8th floor. His corpse fell into the lava, leaving nothing behind." The divine king shook his head and sighed. His face was filled with pity. How regretful. A supreme prodigy like Jianshun actually died at such a young age at the hands of several divine kings. If he had enough time to grow, he probably would have had the right to become the strongest divine king. With another gentle sigh, the divine king left Ming Dong's side. "Arg!" Ming Dong roared out at the sky. His voice filled with grief and indignation rang through most of the 9th floor. At the same time, extremely powerful, terrifying killing intent erupted from his body like a flood, causing the origin energy in the surroundings to become chaotic. The second divine king had personally witnessed the earth-shaking battle, so he spoke in great detail. Every part he spoke of appeared in Ming Dong's head like a real scene. It was like Ming Dong could see Jianshun being surrounded and fighting against 8 divine kings with his cultivation as an early divine king. In the end, he was buried by the lava. Ming Dong was in so much pain that he wanted to die. He was filled with grief and indignation. He refused to believe, nor was he able to accept, that something like this would happen just when he was about to reunite with his long-lost brother. Reality had become so cruel. I'm too late. I'm too late. Ming Dong's heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. He was in great pain. He knelt on the ground powerlessly, his fists pounding the ground again and again. The ground trembled as if there was an earthquake. His eyes were bloodshot. Ninth Majesty, my condolences, a divine general comforted him. Suddenly, Ming Dong left as quickly as he could with a single movement. He directly flew toward the 8th floor. Ninth Majesty. The faces of the 5 divine kings changed slightly. They all cried out as they chased after him. Ming Dong directly arrived on the 8th floor. He looked at the boiling lava below and did not hesitate at all. He put on a set of armor and directly charged down. The armor he was wearing was a divine artifact. With the protection of the divine artifact armor, even if it was difficult for him to reach the bottom of the lava, he would still be able to survive for a while in the lava surface. Even if my brother dies, I won't let him die here. Ming Dong's eyes were filled with determination. Determination flooded Ming Dong's eyes. He charged into the lava with determination, wanting to find Jian Chen's corpse. Ninth Majesty, don't. Behind him, the expressions of the 5 divine generals from the heavenly palace of Bishing changed drastically. They all used their speed, charging over to stop Ming Dong even faster than him. Move! Ming Dong called out. His gaze was extremely sharp. However, the 5 divine generals had been specially chosen by his 8th senior sister. They were the 5 most powerful divine kings in the heavenly palace of Bishing. Every single one of them possessed supreme cultivation and new powerful secret techniques. Their cultivation methods had been created by the Enchantment Grand Prime in the past, making them even more powerful than some supreme prodigies. Ming Dong was unable to resist at all when the 5 of them worked together. He was taken into the air. Ninth Majesty, the lava is extremely terrifying. It can even melt god artifacts. Jianshan has been in the lava for so long, so he's probably dead already. Instead of putting yourself in danger and doing useless things, why don't you save your strength and take revenge for Jianshan? Said a divine general. Revenge. Ming Dong gradually calmed down. His eyes became filled with cold, killing intent. Chapter 2160. Afterwards, the 9th Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing, the 9th disciple of the Enchantment Grand Prime, Ming Dong, seemed to have gone mad. He searched the entire palace for the 8 divine kings who had attacked Jianshan. He even offered an extremely tempting bounty for the identities and locations of the 8 divine kings. As soon as this matter spread, it immediately caused quite a stir in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Even a few of the divine kings below the divine kings paid close attention to it. I knew it. Jianshan has only just broken through to divine king, yet he possesses such great battle prowess. He must be a prodigy of some supreme organization. Do you see it now? Someone has already come to avenge him. They're even willing to become enemies with the 8 divine kings below the divine kings. Although I can't say that I know all of the divine kings who attacked Jianshan, I just happen to know the background of 2 of them. Every single one of them represents an extremely terrifying, supreme organization. Just who is the person who wants to avenge Jianshan? Is he bold enough to offend several supreme organizations at the same time? Not only will he fail to avenge Jianshan, but he'll also drag himself down with him. As long as you provide the identity of one of them, you'll receive a supreme quality saint artifact as a reward. If you provide the exact location, you'll receive a god tier pill as a reward. Heavens, who is this person? He could take out supreme quality saint artifacts and god tier pills so easily. Isn't he a little too rich? Looks like the person who wants to avenge Jianshan has an extremely extraordinary background. He doesn't fear the 8 divine kings at all. He doesn't even take the organizations behind the 8 divine kings seriously. The topic of the astronomical bounty could basically be heard everywhere in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Supreme quality saint artifacts and god tier pills were extremely tempting, let alone the regular divine kings. Even some of the divine kings who were not particularly wealthy were tempted. As soon as Ming Dong's astronomical bounty was announced, it caused a huge commotion in the Azure Poseidon Palace. It became a new topic of discussion. Even the divine kings who had come later all learnt about the story behind the bounty. They learnt that an extremely powerful divine king had appeared in the Azure Poseidon Palace. The divine kings who had come later were very calm. They did not take it too seriously. They either had extremely great backgrounds or were extremely powerful. They had not come for the legacies or treasures. Instead, they had come for the Azure Poseidon Palace. However, very soon, when another bounty for the 8 divine kings was announced, not only were 99% of the people in the Azure Poseidon Palace stunned, but even many of the divine kings were filled with disbelief. A low-quality god artifact as a reward for capturing any one of the 8 divine kings? He's crazy. He's crazy. He's crazy. A low-quality god artifact as a reward? Is this person just spouting nonsense to trick everyone, or is he really that wealthy? Heavens, this is just too crazy. A god artifact. That's a god artifact. Even if it's only a low-quality god artifact, it's still priceless in the saints' world. Let alone the fact that every divine king treats it as a treasure. Even many infinite primes would fight to the death for a low-quality god artifact. A low-quality god artifact for each person captured. If all 8 of them are captured, wouldn't that be 8 low-quality god artifacts? That's unbelievable. Who is this person? Can he really take out so many god artifacts? As soon as the god artifacts were tossed out, it immediately caused a huge commotion in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Even the divine kings who had entered later were stunned. With the astronomical bounty that tempted countless people, the 8 divine kings who had attacked Jianshan naturally attracted the attention of many people. More and more people searched everywhere for news and whereabouts. Ha ha! Jianshan is just an early divine king, so why would he need the 8 of us to surround him? Any single one of us can crush him to death easily. The reason why we're all working together isn't because of how powerful Jianshan is, but because he has something that interests us. We all want that item, which is why it's 8 against 1. To the person who wants to avenge Jianshan, I'll be waiting for you on the 10th floor's Full Moon Peak. I hope you won't make me wait for too long. The supreme god kings who surrounded Jianshan were rather proud as well, so they took the initiative to speak. In the end, their voices reached Ming Dong's ears very soon after being spread around by countless people. Full Moon Peak, Ming Dong murmured on the 9th floor. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he led the 5 divine generals to the Full Moon Peak. At this moment, in a desolate mountain on the 9th floor of the Azure Poseidon Palace, 2 figures, one old and one young, stood at the top of the mountain. They were both stern. The person who's bold enough to avenge Jianshan must have a great background, and he dares to directly place a bounty on the divine king without any fear. It's more than enough to show that he really doesn't take the divine king seriously. Let's hide for now and not venture out, the old man said cautiously. The old man was one of the people who had attacked Jianshan, Songying. The young man was the greatest overgod, Emo Chong. As an overgod, he possessed the strength to kill regular divine kings. If Jianshan was not included, he really would be a resplendent star. He's fearless, but we don't have to fear him, Emo Chong said coldly. Even though he was still very far away from the divine king, he showed no fear towards him at all. Of course, we're not afraid, but young master, you're not the divine king's opponent right now. Once you face the person who wants to avenge Jianshan, I'm not confident I can protect you, said Songying. Then I'll contact Master and get him to send reinforcements, said Mo Chong. There's no need to alarm Master. The trip to the Azure Poseidon Palace is only a trial for the young Master. At the same time, a young man in golden clothes sat on the ground somewhere on the 10th floor. His face was pale, and he was unable to conceal his weakness. Before the young man in golden clothes sat a black-clothed man as well. His face was also pale, and he was weak. Gong Zheng, our souls have both been injured by Jianshan. Even with God-tier pills, we won't be able to recover in a short amount of time. Our strength is nowhere close to our peak condition. In our current condition, we can only work together if we want to get a share of the spoils in the Azure Poseidon Palace, said the black-clothed man. He came from a Bai family. His name was Bai Yi. The Bai family was also a large clan in the Saints' world. They were extremely powerful. The young man in golden clothes nodded and agreed to Bai Yi's suggestion. He said, "I heard that someone has come to avenge Jianshan, even going as far as to offer up a god artifact as a lure. How bold of them. Bai Yi, are you interested in going to the moon's view peak and seeing just what this person is capable of?" Chapter 2161. Full Moon Peak was originally an ordinary mountain range in Poseidon Palace. But now, this mountain that was so ordinary that most people had never heard of it had become famous after a supreme divine king made a declaration. Practically everyone knew about it. The supreme divine king, who had participated in the attack on Jianshan, had challenged the person who had placed an astronomical bounty on Full Moon Peak. He wanted to fight this mysterious person of unknown background and identity, but he was extremely wealthy. This news immediately attracted everyone's attention. For a moment, many cultivators gathered in Poseidon Palace from all directions, hurrying towards Full Moon Peak. Firstly, they wanted to see who the person who placed a bounty on one of the 8 divine kings was. Secondly, they wanted to see if this person really had such strength. With the gathering of these people, the number of people around the Full Moon Peak naturally increased. There were even quite a few supreme divine kings among them. They either rested with their eyes closed or looked at Full Moon Peak calmly. 2 figures stood at the very top of the moon's view peak. They stood there like javelins as powerful presences radiated from them, blanketing the surroundings. Many ordinary god kings in the surroundings felt a great pressure. The 2 of them were clearly divine kings. They were 2 of the 8 people who had attacked Jianshan. They stood side by side with calm expressions, waiting for the person who had placed the bounty. Do you think the mysterious person who placed the astronomical bounty will come? Of course he'll come. Since the mysterious person is bold enough to place a bounty on one of the 8 divine kings and doesn't care about a low-quality god artifact, he's definitely not a simple person. That's hard to say. Perhaps the mysterious person is just bluffing. As for a low-quality god artifact, have you ever heard of anyone actually obtaining one? Around the Full Moon Peak, low voices of discussion could be heard incessantly. While the crowd was curious about the mysterious person who had offered such a high bounty, they also had some doubts. At this moment, a few streaks of light shot through the pitch-black night sky. They shot over from the distance with lightning speed, hovering above Full Moon Peak in the end. There were 6 people in total. The person in the lead was a young man with an extraordinary bearing, but his face was frosty. Behind the young man were 5 middle-aged men in tight robes. They were all expressionless, and their gazes were cold. Which one of you is the divine king who attacked Jianshan? The young man with the extraordinary bearing stood in the air, looking down from above. His voice was icy cold, and he radiated with powerful killing intent. To no surprise, the young man was Ming Dong. Everyone's gazes gathered on Full Moon Peak at that moment. Even some of the divine kings who were resting opened their eyes at that moment. They were all curious about the mysterious person who had placed the astronomical bounty on one of the 8 divine kings. It's actually him. With that glance, the eyes of several people in the crowd immediately narrowed. They became cautious at that moment. At the same time, they seemed to understand something. These people had entered Poseidon Palace at the same time as Ming Dong. They had personally witnessed the divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bisheng following Ming Dong's lead. Looks like you're the person who placed the bounty. As for attacking Jianshan, does Jianshan need 8 divine kings to attack him together? He's just an early divine king. Any one of us can kill him easy as crushing an ant. It's just that he has something that interests us, which is why the 8 of us attacked him together. In the end, some people who were watching the show thought that several divine kings were attacking a single early divine king. One of the divine kings on the Full Moon Peak laughed aloud. Afterwards, he took out a piece of blood-soaked white cloth and waved it at Ming Dong. He sneered, "Do you see this piece of cloth in my hand? This was taken from Jinshan's body, along with his flesh and blood. Speaking of which, it should be the only thing left behind by Jianshan. If you want it, You can exchange it for a low-quality god artifact. Ming Dong's eyes immediately widened as he looked at the blood-soaked piece of cloth in the Divine King's hand. He was filled with grief and indignation. He could clearly sense an extremely familiar presence from the cloth. It was the presence unique to Jinshin's chaotic blood. Arg! Ming Dong roared out furiously. Killing intent surged in his heart as flames of fury burned. Afterwards, he charged towards the Divine King on the full moon peak with surging fury. You've lost your mind so easily. You want to place a bounty on us to avenge Jinshin with just this bit of ability? What a joke. But no matter who you are, the full moon peak will be where you die today. The two Divine Kings on the full moon peak sneered. They both rushed into the air and erupted with astonishing battle prowess, clashing with Ming Dong in the air. The 5 divine generals who had come with Ming Dong did not take part. Instead, they paid close attention to the battle. The trip to the Neptunian Divine Palace was a very good place for the 9th Majesty to train. They would not take part so easily unless their lives were in danger. There's no need to worry about this person, but he has come to avenge Jinshin. He'll be an enemy sooner or later. Why don't we kill him now? Gong Zheng said coldly from the crowd. He and Bai had purposefully disguised themselves this time, so there was no need to worry about being recognized. Don't be impatient. There are still 5 powerful guards beside him. There's no need to hurry. Let's observe first, said Bai. He stared at the battle between the 3 of them. Violent booms constantly rang out in the air. The battle between Ming Dong and the 2 Divine Kings had already reached its climax. It was extremely intense. It had to be mentioned that Ming Dong was very powerful. He had already become one of the Divine Kings without any doubt. Not only was he no weaker than Jinshin, but he was even slightly stronger than Jinshin. Not only was he not at a disadvantage against the 2 Divine Kings by himself, but he even seemed to gain the upper hand. Although only a few seconds had passed since the battle between the 3 of them, they were all covered in blood. They were all injured to varying degrees. Sky-crushing sword chi. Suddenly, Ming Dong bellowed out. The power of the laws of destruction descended, condensing into a strand of black sword chi that was several meters long. It radiated with a terrifying presence that made all the spectators tremble in fear. It pierced through the air as a streak of black light and shot towards one of them. Chapter 2162. The Divine King dared not be careless at all when he faced Ming Dong's god-tier battle skill. He was stern, and he immediately bellowed out. The energy around him surged as the power of laws gathered in the air, forming a dazzling pillar of energy that shot out. He had also used a battle skill. It was very powerful. Although it was not a god-tier battle skill, it seemed to have surpassed the 9th grade of the truth tier. It was on the level of gods. God-tier battle skills were the same as god artifacts. Normally speaking, only primordial realm experts could use them. Among god kings, even the supreme god kings on the god king's throne who could use god-tier battle skills were as rare as phoenix feathers and Sheelan horns. Of course, there were some god-tier battle skills like the profound sword chi that stole from the mysteries of the world. They did not have particularly high requirements for the user's cultivation, so they could be used by cultivators at lower cultivation realms. However, there were probably less than 3 such battle skills across the entire Immortals world. Even if the Immortals world and the Saints world were combined, there were probably less than a handful of battle skills like that. They were extremely rare and precious. Boom! With a deafening sound, Ming Dong's spatial annihilation sword chi gave off a presence of destruction. It destroyed the pillar of energy like a hot knife through butter. Afterwards, it did not slow down at all, striking the Divine King's chest with unimaginable power. Crack! With a crisp sound, the supreme quality saint artifact on the Divine King's body immediately shattered. His entire chest caved in as the destructive energy rampaged through his body. His organs and meridians were immediately pulverized. His body was heavily injured, and he constantly vomited blood. Ming Dong's presence skyrocketed, becoming more and more powerful. Killing intent was so dense that it was almost tangible. He stared at the Divine King furiously and resentfully as he took a step forward. With just a single step, he crossed a huge distance and arrived before the injured Divine King. His sword shone brightly as the laws of destruction gathered. He directly swung down. The strike seemed to possess the power of a domain. When Ming Dong swung down, the space around him froze, trapping his opponent firmly. He was unable to move at all. Immediately, blood sprayed into the sky. The Divine King's head was directly cut off by Ming Dong's strike. His head separated from his body, and the blood of the Divine King turned into a rain of blood. It shone like stars as it rained down from the sky like a meteor shower. Do you know who I am? As long as their souls remained, they would not truly die. The Divine King that Ming Dong had cut off did not die because of this. He stared at Ming Dong with eyes filled with hatred as he tried to put up a tough front. Anyone who took part in the attack on Jianshan, no matter who you are or what your background is, will not be able to escape death in the end, because I, Ming Dong, will never spare any of you, Ming Dong said coldly. Ming Dong said coldly. His face was frigid as his killing intent was extremely heavy. He directly grabbed the Supreme God King's head with one hand and used a secret technique to seal up the Supreme God King's soul in the head so that it could not escape. Gu Li's master is the ancestral emperor of an everlasting empire. If you kill him, you better think about the consequences. The other Divine King no longer attacked. He stood in the distance as he stared at Ming Dong in shock. Ming Dong said nothing. He held the head of one of the Divine Kings in his left hand as he wielded his sword in his right, directly charging towards the second Divine King. After witnessing Ming Dong's strength, the second Divine King understood that he was not Ming Dong's opponent. He no longer had any interest in fighting. Without any hesitation, he used a secret technique and fled as quickly as he could. Stop him! Ming Dong called out coldly and immediately ordered the 5 divine generals. If the Divine King wanted to flee, Ming Dong really might not be able to stop him. The 5 divine generals had already spread out in the surroundings when Ming Dong began to attack. They had already surrounded the battlefield. With Ming Dong's order, the 5 of them did not hesitate at all. They immediately raised their hands and used a secret technique to seal off the space there. The expression of the Supreme God King who wanted to flee changed drastically when he sensed the changes in space. He suddenly turned around and stared at Ming Dong. He growled, "Sir, do you really plan on killing all of us?" What answered him was a sword imbued with the laws of destruction. It slashed towards him mercilessly. They were not Ming Dong's opponent when they were fighting 2 against 1. Now that they were fighting 1-on-1, their disadvantage was even more evident. Before long, the second Divine King was also beheaded by Ming Dong. The Divine King's blood dyed the sky red, dyeing the entire moon's full peak red. The battle had come to an end, but the people gathered around the moon's full peak had already fallen silent from shock. Their hearts churned. The 2 Divine Kings below the Divine King were like legends in the eyes of many people. They were existences that only existed in legends, yet now 2 of them had actually died right before their eyes. This greatly shocked them, and they were unable to calm down for a long time. However, the Supreme God Kings in the crowd were all stern. They stared at Ming Dong without blinking at all, as if they wanted to remember his face firmly. The strength that Ming Dong had displayed right now was enough to make many of the experts below the Divine King fear him. This person doesn't seem like any of the people below the Divine King. Whether it's his name or his characteristics, they're all extremely unfamiliar. Looks like this person called Ming Dong hasn't tried to challenge the Divine King. Some of the experts below the Divine King all sighed emotionally inside. Let's go. This person is very powerful, and our souls have been heavily injured. We're not his opponent at all, Bai Yi said to Gong Zheng secretly in the crowd. His expression was very ugly. Gong Zheng's face was sunken as well. He did not dare to look at Ming Dong, as he was afraid that the person on the moon's full peak would sense his presence from his gaze. Bai Yi and Gong Zheng retreated carefully, following the crowd and leaving the moon's full peak. The 2 of them had disguised themselves when they came, so they did not have to worry about being recognized. In another direction of the crowd, a woman in a white dress with a veil over her face stood there gracefully. She also stared at Ming Dong, who stood on the moon's full peak, solemnly. "Your Highness, this person is very powerful. He's probably qualified to be one of the 100 Divine Kings' full peak. For your safety, I suggest that you leave the Tsang Poseidon Palace." Around a dozen Divine Kings gathered around the woman, protecting her like guards. One of the Divine King's guards spoke to the woman cautiously. The woman was the princess of an ancient empire with a long history and deep heritage. She was also one of the 8 Divine Kings who had attacked Jianshan. In another direction, a woman also stood in the crowd in an extremely low-key manner. She wore a lot on her head, so no one could see her face. This woman was also one of the 8 people. She was a proud daughter of the heavens from a large family. However, at this moment, her pretty face that was hidden under the lot was similarly filled with seriousness. Chapter 2163. After killing the 2 supreme Divine Kings, Ming Dong stood on the moon's view peak and increased the bounty in front of all the Divine Kings. Then, he left the moon's view peak with the 5 divine generals with the 2 heads in hand. Even though god artifacts were very precious, where every single one of them was priceless, or even priceless, Ming Dong's revenge for Jianshan was clearly more important than anything else. He wanted to find the remaining people as soon as possible, even if he had to pay a huge price. Many of the 8 Divine Kings who had attacked Jianshan had secretly come here during the battle on the moon's view peak. However, they were all very cautious, disguising themselves and hiding their presences. They blended into the crowd, so no one was able to recognize them. The Divine Kings gathered around the moon's view peak dispersed very quickly, returning the moon's view peak to its previous peace. All that remained was a puddle of Divine King's blood, as if it was silently describing the tragedy from before. After this, Ming Dong's name spread through the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Many of the Divine Kings in the Tsang Poseidon Palace remembered that a supreme prodigy who was not a Divine King but possessed the strength of a Divine King had appeared in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. As Ming Dong became more and more famous, more and more people began to pay attention to his astronomical bounty. They began to take him seriously. After all, although the astronomical bounty had spread like wildfire before and basically everyone knew about it, not many people actually took it seriously. They all treated it as a joke. However, now that Ming Dong had made a name for himself, all of this would change. He had used his great strength to win absolute trust. After all, as a Divine King, every single one of them was a proud and lofty existence. Their reputation was more important than anything else. People like that would naturally keep their word. They would never ruin their reputation. For a moment, more and more people searched for the remaining 6 Divine Kings who had attacked Jianshan in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. As a matter of fact, the Divine Kings who knew Ming Dong was related to the heavenly palace of Bisheng treated this as their top priority. They wanted to use this opportunity to befriend Ming Dong so that they could establish a connection with the heavenly palace of Bisheng. Ming Dong returned to the boundless world of volcanoes on the 8th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace with the 2 Divine Kings' heads. He hovered several dozen meters in the air as he stared at the churning magma below him deeply. His face was filled with loneliness and sorrow. "Jianshan, I've already found 2 of the 8 Divine Kings. Do you see them? I've come with their heads to pay my respects to you. I'll use their blood and souls to pay tribute to your reincarnation," Ming Dong murmured softly. His heart was heavy as he was filled with sorrow. Afterwards, he relaxed his grip on the 2 heads. The 2 Divine Kings' heads continued to tumble down from the sky. "No, don't. Let me go. Let me go. My clan will definitely be grateful to you. If you really do kill me, my master will never spare me. It's not just you. Even the organization behind you will have to bear the wrath of my master. My master is a Grand Prime. You better think it through. If you let me go right now, I can let bygones be bygones." The souls of the 2 Divine Kings were still present, but they had been sealed in their heads by Ming Dong, so they could not escape. Seeing how they were getting closer and closer to the magma, they both became flustered. They roared out furiously and even directly threatened Ming Dong. Ming Dong's face did not change at all. Even the 5 divine generals were the same. Even when Ming Dong mentioned a grand prime, they still did not take him seriously. No, don't. I am the disciple of the ancestral emperor of the God's Grace Empire of the Henia Plain, Gu Li. If anyone saves me, I will ask my master to take action and grant them a wish. One of the divine kings sent out a mental message, and it rang out into the distance. At this moment of life and death, he cast aside all his pride and dignity. All he wanted to do was think of a way to survive. There were still many divine kings collecting fire divine crystals on the 8th floor. When they heard Gu Li's mental message, they were all stunned before becoming zealous. They were not unfamiliar with the God's Grace Empire. It was one of the 2 eternal empires on the Henia Plain. It stood at the apex of the plain and was extremely powerful. The ancestral emperors of the eternal empires were all grand primes. People like them were existences who stood at the apex of the pyramid. They were supreme existences that looked down on all. They were extremely extraordinary. If they could make a wish from such a supreme figure, it would definitely be a heaven-defying opportunity that could change their fates. It was something that could only be chanced upon. For a moment, many divine kings on the 8th floor were tempted. They all gathered over, but when they saw the cold Ming Dong and the 5 divine generals, they all became hesitant. They did not dare to take action to save Gu Li. They did not lose their heads over this. They all thought of the same thing. This person was even bold enough to kill the disciple of a grand prime without any fear. So how could his background be weak? What are you standing around for? Hurry up and take action. Gu Li panicked. He bellowed out, but no one actually took action. In the end, Gu Li could only reluctantly let his soul fall into the lava with his head sealed. He was swallowed by the scorching lava below. All the divine kings in the surroundings were shocked when they saw this. That was the disciple of the ancestral emperor of the God's Grace Empire. Yet he had died just like that. The God's Grace Empire was on the Henia Plain. It was not far away from the Poseidon Palace. Was this young man not afraid that the ancestral emperor of the God's Grace Empire would block the entrance to the Poseidon Palace? However, the divine kings seemed to realize something soon afterwards. Their faces all changed, and they immediately left as quickly as they could, vanishing in the blink of an eye. They did not go to the moon's view peak, so they naturally had no idea what had happened there. They were afraid that Ming Dong would suddenly silence them. Ming Dong did not care about the divine kings. His gaze remained fixed on the lava below. His eyes were gloomy, and he was in low spirits. He seemed rather dejected. He remained there for an entire hour. Only after confirming that the 2 heads were dead did he leave with the 5 divine generals to continue searching for the remaining 6 people. At this moment, at the bottom of the magma, a man in golden silk armor endured the terrifying heat of the magma. He held a net that was also woven from golden silk. He used the net to drag a large pile of fire divine crystals as he flew towards a small, golden tower nearby. However, just as he was about to enter the small golden tower, his body suddenly froze. He stared up and saw 2 half-melted heads slowly sinking down above him. The person cried out in surprise. With a wave of his hand, he caught the 2 heads. Without any hesitation, he entered the tower with a flash. He was none other than Jianshun, who everyone believed to be dead. The fire divine crystals had already piled up into a small hill within the Inata Tower. There were so many that they were uncountable. They were like a pile of useless rocks that had been casually tossed around. Jianshun entered the Inata Tower and casually tossed over a pile of fire divine crystals he had just collected, causing the mountain of fire divine crystals to grow slightly larger. Afterwards, he stared at the 2 heads in his hand. These 2 heads are somewhat familiar. It's as if I've seen them before. Jianshun studied the 2 heads. Although they were completely unrecognizable, they possessed a familiar presence. Chapter 2164. I must have seen the owners of these 2 heads when they were alive, but I don't have a particularly deep impression of them. Coupled with the fact that most of the heads have been melted by the lava, not only am I unable to recognize them, but I don't even know if they were a man or a woman when they were alive. Jianshun held the 2 heads in his hand as he frowned slightly. The souls in the two heads had already dispersed, and a large amount of lava had poured in. Scorching lava constantly flowed out of the heads, covering Jinshin's hand. A while later, Jinshin's eyes suddenly narrowed. He finally remembered who the owners of the two heads were. Jinshin had never personally seen the faces of the 8 divine kings who had attacked him before, because they all shone with the light of laws. However, he had clashed with them before, so he could clearly remember their presences. At that moment, the remnant auras of the two heads in his hands were exactly the same as those of the 2 people he was holding. I never thought that 2 of them would actually die. I had planned on personally seeking revenge, but they died to the hands of someone else first. Jinshin sighed gently as his face was filled with mixed feelings. With a flash, chaos suddenly appeared before Jinshin. He stared at the 2 heads in Jinshin's hand that had already changed beyond recognition and said, "2 divine kings have died in a single stroke. It looks like the battle in that song, Poseidon Palace, is becoming more and more intense. Even the supreme divine king who sits on the divine king's throne is gradually losing his advantage." Jinshin nodded in agreement. That song, Poseidon Palace, is no longer the same as before. The appearance of that song, Poseidon Palace, means that something huge is about to happen. It's impossible to hide this news, so it should have spread to the outside world long ago. If I've guessed correctly, the large clans and organizations of the Saint world should have sent quite a few divine king overgods into Poseidon Palace. There should be a few extremely powerful supreme overgods among them. Kea became extremely solemn as well. If the Azure Poseidon Palace really does send more experts, it will only be more disadvantageous for us unless we remain in the lava. Otherwise, with Lil Man's uniqueness, I'm afraid that as soon as we appear, we will become the target of public criticism. Jinshin, what do you plan to do next? Jinshin pondered deeply for a short moment and said, "There's still some time before Azure Poseidon Palace closes. I'll seize this period of time to gather some divine flame crystals, and then I'll study what happened to Lil Man. After that, I'll decide what to do in the end." Time passed silently. In the blink of an eye, a few days had already passed since Ming Dong killed the 2 supreme divine king overgods. During this time, Ming Dong constantly searched for the whereabouts of the other 6 people. The astronomical bounty he offered had already spread across the entire Azure Poseidon Palace. The temptation of a god artifact made countless people envious. However, although Ming Dong's reckless display of his wealth had encouraged the divine king overgods in the Azure Poseidon Palace to search for the other 6 people, it had also drawn over a few people who wanted to kill him for his treasures. As a result, various assassinations and traps were set up to find Ming Dong in an attempt to kill him and steal his treasures. However, without any exception, all the people who set their sights on Ming Dong never returned. Not only did they fail to take anything from Ming Dong, but they even established Ming Dong's name instead, making Ming Dong even more renowned in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Over the past few days, Ming Dong had obtained all the information on the other 6 people and learned of their origins. However, due to the battle on the moon's view peak, the 6 of them had all hidden themselves after witnessing Ming Dong's strength. As a result, Ming Dong failed to find any traces of them, even after several days. The 6 of them sure have hidden themselves well. I can't keep searching like this. However, now that I know their identities, it'll be almost impossible for them to escape from me. Ming Dong's face sank. Killing intent surged as he coldly called out to the 5 divine generals, "Protect me. I'm going to use fate techniques to find them." The faces of the 5 divine generals all changed when they heard that. One of them immediately said with a heavy voice, "You can't, Ninth Majesty. Fate techniques are forbidden. If you don't have the corresponding strength, you'll be injured by the power of the laws. It'll be very difficult to recover from that. The price is too great." Fate techniques had been created by Ming Dong's master. Once the technique was used, he could peer into the heavenly secrets and mysteries of the laws, as well as see his own reincarnation and the fates of all living beings. It was extremely wondrous and profound. With Ming Dong's strength, Although he could not peer into the heavenly secrets and mysteries of the laws, nor could he see his own reincarnation and the fates of all living beings, it was not too difficult for him to use the information he possessed to look through the various layers of karma and find the traces of a few people within a certain range. As long as I can avenge my brother, so what if I'm injured by the power of the laws? Ming Dong's voice was extremely firm. It was filled with an unquestionable sense of dominance. Furthermore, he was a man of his word. Without the slightest hesitation, he immediately began to use his fate technique. At the same time, the news that the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace had awakened, and that the Tsang Poseidon Palace was about to accept a new master spread through the Tsang Poseidon Palace, causing a great uproar. For a time, many cultivators of various levels of cultivation from various places began to move about the Tsang Poseidon Palace. They began a carpet search, searching for the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. The 12th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace was no longer a forbidden ground in the eyes of the regular divine kings. Many divine kings surged into the 12th floor. They searched every inch of the floor with burning desire. They did not miss a single spot. The Tsang Poseidon Palace was a high-quality god artifact in the first place, and it contained an unimaginable amount of resources. All of them knew that as long as they could obtain the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace and become the master of this place, they would possess everything here. However, even though they had turned the Tsang Poseidon Palace upside down, they did not find a single trace of the artifact spirit. At this moment, a graceful woman in a white dress sat on a boulder on the 11th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. She wore a veil over her face. Although her appearance could not be seen, it was possible to tell that she definitely possessed extraordinary beauty from her large, beautiful eyes. Over a dozen divine king guards stood behind the woman, guarding the place loyally as they observed the surroundings at all times. If the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace doesn't appear, finding it will be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Your Highness, should we continue searching? A guard asked politely. Chapter 2165. What? That girl is the person chosen by the artifact spirit? Doesn't that mean? It said that the girl is only at the human realm. Your Highness, that's impossible. The guard behind her all spoke in surprise. All of them found it hard to believe. I find this very hard to believe as well. However, looking at history, out of the countless cultivators who have entered the Tsang Poseidon Palace, which one of them has been protected by the world of the Tsang Poseidon Palace? No. In the long history of the Tsang Poseidon Palace, something like this has never happened in the Tsang Poseidon Palace, the woman said softly. She looked at the world of the Tsang Poseidon Palace with mixed feelings. However, something so unbelievable has happened right now. Moreover, it happened when the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace has awakened. What does that mean? It means that the reason why the girl is protected by the world of the Tsang Poseidon Palace is because of the help of the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. As a result, I can conclude that the girl is the person chosen by the artifact spirit. The guards behind the woman looked at each other with that. They all believed that the princess analysis was very reasonable, but at the same time, they felt very confused. They did not understand why the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace would choose a girl with such low cultivation. But the girl has already fallen into the lava. She hasn't appeared again, a guard asked carefully. The princess' eyes became deep. She said, "Don't forget that the girl is protected by the world. As long as the power that surpasses the Tsang Poseidon Palace doesn't appear, she'll be fine." As a result, although the lava is terrifying, it can't harm the girl at all. Let's go to the 8th floor and see if we can find a girl. Do you think you can still leave? Princess Yun Xiaoyan of the Thousand Lotus Empire. At this moment, an icy cold voice rang out from nearby. The voice was filled with chilling, killing intent, causing the temperature of the surroundings to abruptly plummet. Who is it? Princess Yun Xiaoyan's face changed. She suddenly turned around and looked behind her. Her beautiful face, hidden under the veil, immediately became extremely stern. With her strength, she actually failed to sense the person approaching her at all. 1,000 meters away, the space there twisted, and 6 figures silently appeared in the empty space. They all concealed themselves and used secret techniques to conceal themselves. They approached the place silently, where even the supreme God King on the God King's throne, Yin Xiaoyan, failed to sense them at all. Yin Xiaoyan's eyes suddenly narrowed when she saw the person who had arrived. However, her expression did not change as she said, "Young Master Ming, may I know what you meant by what you said earlier?" The 6 people were Ming Dong and the 5 divine generals. However, at this moment, Ming Dong's face was extremely pale. He seemed rather weak, as if he had been heavily injured. He had paid a very great price to use destiny techniques. He had been injured by the power of laws. So even after ingesting a god-tier healing pill, it would be very difficult for him to recover in a short amount of time. Yin Xiaoyan, you've come because you know why I've come. Do you want to deny taking part in the attack on Jianxin? Ming Dong stood in the air. His tone was ice cold, without the slightest emotion. An aura as vast as the ocean radiated from his body in all directions. Yin Xiaoyan giggled and pulled down the veil on her face, revealing a face that was enough to mesmerize all living things. She was truly as beautiful as a goddess, elegant and refined. Young Master Ming sure is skilled. I've already hidden myself so well, and even the guards by my side have disguised themselves. I thought I could fool everyone in the Tsang Poseidon Palace, but I never thought that I would still be unable to escape young Master Ming's eyes in the end. Yin Xiaoyan giggled as she stared at Ming Dong with her large eyes. No matter how you hide yourself or what methods you have, anyone who has taken part in the attack on Jianxin will die in the end. Even if you leave the Tsang Poseidon Palace, I'll hunt you down until the end. I won't let a single one of you go, Ming Dong said coldly. His expression did not change at all. Young Master Ming, I may have taken part in the attack on Jianxin, but I did not use my full strength. Is young Master Ming really so cold-hearted that you don't know how to treat a woman well and want to cut me down with your sword? Yin Xiaoyan asked. She seemed to have been wronged, making her seem pitiful. Her demeanor, coupled with her peerless beauty, truly possessed an extremely strong allure. In the entire world, it was likely that not many men would be ruthless enough to do such a thing to her, to do such a ruthless thing to a flower. Dying. Ming Dong's face turned cold. He did not waver at all. With a jolt of his sword, he charged at Yin Xiaoyan murderously with the power of the laws of destruction. Protect the princess! Yin Xiaoyan's guards all called out as they charged at Ming Dong fearlessly. However, although there were late Divine King experts among the guards, they were just regular Divine Kings. The difference between them and the experts on the Divine King's throne was just too great. Ming Dong's eyes were cold as killing intent surged. The power of the laws of destruction on his sword transformed into a furious dragon, instantly enveloping the 3 Divine Kings. The 3 Divine Kings were unable to put up any resistance at all. They were pulverized by the terrifying power of destruction in a single instance, chopped to pieces. Back off! Yin Xiaoyan's face was ugly. She called out and struck out with her full strength. She wielded her sword, and with the power of the laws of the sword, she shot out a streak of light that was several hundred meters long as she engaged in an intense battle with Ming Dong. Boom! The 2 of them clashed, erupting with deafening booms. The laws of destruction and the laws of the sword intertwined, engaging in the most intense clash in the sky. Terrifying ripples of energy turned into storms that wreaked havoc in the surroundings, causing the world to collapse and the sun to dim. You sure are vicious. Yin Xiaoyan retreated in the air. She was no longer as graceful as before. Her hair was disheveled, and she was in a horrible shape. Her snow-white clothes were covered in specks of blood. Ming Dong was very powerful. Not only had he grasped various powerful battle skills and secret techniques, but he had also mastered the laws of destruction to perfection. Yin Xiaoyan had already lost the upper hand in their brief clash. She was not Ming Dong's opponent at all. Heavens collapsed. Suddenly, Ming Dong bellowed out. The laws of destruction condensed in his hand wildly, turning into a huge hand that blotted out the sky. With a terrifying might that could cause the world to pale, he slammed it towards Yun Xiaoyan mercilessly. Chapter 2166. As she said that, an extremely powerful pulse of energy radiated from Yun Xiaoyan. She was stern as she formed a seal with one hand before suddenly extending a finger at the sky. As she extended her finger, a powerful sword chi immediately shot out. It shone with a demonic blood-red light, shooting into the sky with an unstoppable force. After using the blood-red sword chi, Yun Xiaoyan's face paled as well. The sword chi she had used was an extremely powerful secret technique. It required her to burn her essence blood to activate it, and she would pay quite a price every time she used it. As a result, the sword chi barely possessed the power of a god-tier battle skill. Ming Dong could not help but sneer disdainfully when he saw that. He suddenly clenched his hand, and the huge hand he had conjured with the god-tier battle skill clenched tightly as well. It grabbed Yun Xiaoyan's sword chi and crushed it to pieces. Spurt. Immediately, Yun Xiaoyan felt like her heart had been crushed. Blood spurted from her mouth as her pale face became even paler. Although the blood-red sword chi that she had used a secret technique to cast through burning her essence blood was powerful enough to make it a god-tier battle skill, it was still just barely. Compared to Ming Dong's true god-tier battle skill, it was obviously a huge chasm. However, after crushing Yun Xiaoyan's blood-red sword chi, the huge hand did not slow down at all. It enveloped Yun Xiaoyan with a tremendous destructive force and slammed into the ground heavily. With a great boom, the ground shook. The palm strike was extremely powerful, leaving a deep imprint in the ground. And this was the destructive power within the Azure Poseidon Palace, a high-quality god artifact. If it were outside, no one doubted the power of Ming Dong's palm strike at all. It was enough to shatter a small planet easily. Any matter in the Saints' world could not be compared to the Tian Yuan continent. Ming Dong's palm strike was enough to pulverize a small planet in the Saints' world, which was more than enough to demonstrate how shocking it was. Yun Xiaoyan did not die. At that moment, her hair was disheveled and she was in a sorry state. She simply looked like a beggar. Her exceptional appearance was also frighteningly pale. She struggled to her feet. Her white dress had already been reduced to ashes, and a set of dimly lit top-grade Saint artifact armor that was riddled with cracks covered her body, preventing her body from being exposed. Young Master Ming, you're really ruthless. You don't know how to be tender and protective of the fairer sex. Could it be that you're determined to kill me today? Yun Xiaoyan stared deeply at Ming Dong, who was hovering in the air like a merciless god of slaughter. She seemed to want to imprint his face deeply in her mind. That's right, Ming Dong said coldly. He stepped through the air with his sword in hand, approaching Yun Xiaoyan step by step. Ha ha, since young Master Ming doesn't want to spare me, I'll do as you wish. However, I won't die to young Master Ming's hands, Yun Xiaoyan giggled. In the end, she glanced at Ming Dong deeply with mixed feelings. Afterward, she extended a finger towards her forehead and shattered her soul. She passed away. The princess of the Thousand Lotus Empire, a supreme beauty who was a descendant of the divine king, had died just like that. Your Highness, Yun Xiaoyan's suicide caused a dozen or so guard to be filled with grief and grief. Ming Dong paused slightly as well. He stared at the lifeless Yun Xiaoyan in surprise and fell silent. A while later, Ming Dong slowly made his way over to Yun Xiaoyan's corpse. Ignoring the forceful objections of the guards, he crouched down in front of Yun Xiaoyan's corpse and carefully examined it. Only after confirming that Yun Xiaoyan was dead did he stand up. With his back to the guards in front of Yun Xiaoyan, he said, "Your princess is a respectable person. She's also the first woman that I, Ming Dong, have taken notice of. As a result, I won't be taking her head away. You can leave with her corpse." With that, Ming Dong left with the 5 divine generals. Now, 3 out of the 8 divine king that had attacked Jianshan before were dead. However, Ming Dong had already grasped the locations of the remaining 5 after using the Art of Destiny. As Ming Dong focused on taking revenge for Jianshan, a new storm was brewing in the cerulean Poseidon Palace. Xiao Man, who had fallen into the lava with Jinshin's Anita Tower under the protection of the world, have become the focus of everyone's attention in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace. Yun Xiaoyan was not the only one who guessed that Xiao Man was extremely likely to be chosen by the artifact spirit of the Cerulean Poseidon Palace. Basically, after learning that Xiao Man was protected by the power of the Cerulean Poseidon Palace, everyone believed that it was extremely likely for Xiao Man to have some secret connection with the Cerulean Poseidon Palace. As a matter of fact, some people even claimed that the changes in the Cerulean Poseidon Palace were extremely likely to be caused by Xiao Man. Several million years ago, a supreme expert pointed out that the Cerulean Poseidon Palace would undergo a great change when the cerulean moon appears. However, no one was able to predict what the change would be, whether it would be good or bad. As a result, it has always remained a mystery. But looking at it now, the great change is extremely likely to be the awakening of the artifact spirit of the Cerulean Poseidon Palace. The Cerulean Poseidon Palace is about to undergo a master recognition ceremony. This matter probably isn't as simple as it seems on the surface. If it's just the Cerulean Poseidon Palace choosing a new master, it can't be described as a great change. We have to be careful from now on. Something that can be described as a great change by a supreme expert is no small matter. Many divine kings discuss the matter. There are also a few divine kings who thought of a rumor that had been passed down for over 3 million years. Suddenly, they realized that the trip to the Cerulean Poseidon Palace was probably not as simple as they had imagined it to be. They all became cautious. Have you heard? Ming Dong, who offered an astronomical bounty, has already personally killed 4 supreme divine kings. After the battle on the moon's view peak, Princess Yun Xiaoyan of the Thousand Lotus Empire and the beloved daughter of the Kangmang clan, Kangmang Fian, were killed one after another. Their souls were wiped out. Before long, another shocking piece of news appeared, attracting everyone's attention. Ming Dong is just too crazy. He's even bold enough to kill the beloved daughter of the Kangmang clan. The Kangmang clan used to be a peak clan that shook up the Saints' world. They were no weaker than the Taoist sect of Neptunia in the past. Although they've declined now, their heritage is still very deep. They're not to be trifled with. What kind of background do you think Ming Dong has? He's actually offended so many peak organizations just for the sake of avenging the dead. Fortunately, I didn't take part in the attack against Jinshin back then. Otherwise, I probably would have been reduced to a corpse by now. As soon as Ming Dong was mentioned, quite a few God Kings immediately became interested and joined in the discussion. Chapter 21:67. On the 9th floor of the Neptunian Divine Palace, an old man sat in a gloomy cave with his presence concealed in a desolate mountain range that few people set foot in. It was obvious with a single glance that the old man was hiding from something. He was extremely cautious. Not only did he carefully conceal himself at all times, but he even covered the surroundings of the cave with various concealment formations of quite a high level. Even if an expert on the level of a divine king passed by the cave, they would not discover the secrets hidden here. Just who is this Ming Dong? He's actually killed 4 supreme divine kings in a row. Even Yun Xiaoyan of the Thousand Lotus Empire and Kangmang Fian of the Kangmang clan have died. The old man frowned as he murmured to himself. The old man was the divine king below the divine king, Song Ying. Song Ying had not emerged in the past few days. He had been hiding in the cave the entire time, doing his best to avoid clashing with Ming Dong. When he had made this decision, it was not because he feared Ming Dong. Instead, he did not want to become a burden to the young master of Mo Chang. He had come to the Blue Poseidon Palace this time under his master's orders to protect Mo Chang. Although he had not emerged in the past few days, he was extremely well informed. He basically knew everything that had happened in the Blue Poseidon Palace. As a result, he obviously knew what Ming Dong had done. In the beginning, Song Ying had been deeply shocked when Ming Dong had killed 2 divine kings in the battle on the moon's view peak. Afterwards, when several supreme god kings died to Ming Dong's hands one after another, Song Ying truly began to take Ming Dong seriously. As a matter of fact, it had even reached the level of fear. Looks like the Blue Poseidon Palace is not a place to stay for long. For the young master's safety, I might as well take the young master out of the Blue Poseidon Palace ahead of time, Song Ying thought. However, at this moment, Song Ying's eyes suddenly narrowed. He suddenly raised his hand, and a piece of azure scale vaguely appeared on his palm. It flickered with light. A great sense of danger was clearly transmitted to Song Ying's heart through the scale. Oh no! Song Ying's face changed. Without any hesitation, he vanished from the gloomy cave with a slight sway of his body. When he reappeared, he was already outside the cave. He hurriedly sent a message to Mo Chung, who was in seclusion in another cave. Afterwards, azure light flickered on his body as he shot off into the distance with unbelievable speed. At the same time, the silent space in the air above the mountain range suddenly twisted. Ming Dong silently appeared there with the 5 divine generals. I never thought that he would be able to sense our arrival, but since I've found him, he can forget about escaping. Chase him. Ming Dong glared at Song Ying's departing figure as he said emotionlessly. He immediately chased after him with the 5 divine generals. In terms of strength, Song Ying might only be at the bottom of the Divine King's list, but in terms of speed, he was definitely one of the best. Azure light flickered on Song Ying. At that moment, he seemed to have become an azure punk. He shot through the 9th floor at an extremely terrifying speed, crossing 100,000 kilometers in a single instance. He moved even faster than a meteor. It was truly terrifying. When he flew over a few divine kings, some of them did not even sense him at all. They did not discover his existence. Ming Dong pursued Song Ying closely with the 5 divine generals. They all used secret techniques and pushed their speed to the limit. In particular, the laws of wind revolved around Ming Dong. He turned into a gentle gust of wind as he rapidly advanced. However, they were still far behind Song Ying. It was difficult for them to catch up. That's the Azure Peng's movement technique. 9th Majesty. The Azure Peng is a rather renowned peak expert in the Saints world. He's renowned for his speed. Since this person possesses the Azure Peng's movement technique, it'll be very difficult for us to catch up to him, said a divine general behind Ming Dong. Really? Then let's see how long he can maintain this speed for, sneered Ming Dong. He used a secret technique. As he formed seals with his hands, a dazzling ball of golden light suddenly appeared, condensing into the shape of a tower. As soon as the pagoda was formed, a vast and majestic aura spread out. There seemed to be a supreme Taoist rhyme circulating on the pagoda. Although it was hazy and blurry, it gave people the illusion that it could suppress the great way of heaven and earth. If Jianshan were present, he would definitely be able to tell with a single glance that the Tower Ming Dong had condensed was 70% similar to the Inata Tower. The difference was because the Inata Tower was just too damaged, making it difficult for him to take a closer look. Moreover, the presences of the 2 towers were completely different as well. The Inata Tower in Jinshan's hand seemed extremely ordinary. Aside from being covered in sword slashes, there was nothing particularly special about it. However, the Tower Ming Dong had condensed through a secret technique gave off a presence that could make the world pale. It was extremely dazzling and sharp, such that no one could ignore its existence. According to my 8th senior sister, this technique was created by my 1st senior sister based on Master's famed treasure in the past. Even though I can't even unleash a 10,000th of the technique's power with my current cultivation, it's nowhere near as powerful as the other battle skills I know in an open battle. However, this technique can pierce through space and ignore the distance of space. It's perfect for a situation like this. Ming Dong growled before extending a finger towards Song Ying from afar. With that, the figure of the Inata Tower condensed before him immediately vanished. It pierced through space and passed through the restraints of space and time, appearing behind Song Ying in a single instance. Song Ying naturally sensed the danger behind him, which made his face change drastically. However, Ming Dong's secret technique had been created based on the Inata Tower. Even though the power it could unleash was extremely limited in Ming Dong's hands, it still possessed some of the Inata Tower's charm, so Song Ying was unable to dodge it at all. Bang! With a heavy sound, the figure of the Anata tower struck Song Ying's back, causing him to vomit blood. He was heavily injured and slowed down as well. Song Ying's heart sank. He knew that it was difficult for him to maintain his advantage against the pursuit of the people behind him in his current state. Determination immediately filled his face as he rapidly advanced towards the 8th floor. Many divine kings had already gathered on the 8th floor of the Anata Tower in the world of volcanoes. There were so many of them that there were over 10,000 of them. Even the supreme divine king below the divine king had quite a few of them. Moreover, the number was constantly increasing because divine kings would be descending from the 9th floor or climbing up from the 7th at basically every single moment. As a result, basically over 80% of the cultivators on the Poseidon Palace had gathered on the 8th floor of the Poseidon Palace. All of them gathered around the spot where Jianshan had fallen into the lava. Sometimes, their eyes would shine brightly as they stared at the churning lava below. Other times, they would close their eyes and sense carefully as if they were searching for something. Since that girl is protected by the power of the Poseidon Palace, she definitely won't die. Everyone, let's think of a way and see if we can enter the lava to search. That's right. That girl must be trapped in the lava. With her mere strength at the mortal realm, she can't come up at all. We need to save her. The lava is terrifying, but we have defensive god artifacts. If we work together and push the god artifacts to their limits, I believe we can last a while in the lava. That girl is extremely important. We have to find her no matter what. We can't afford to fail. Chapter 2168. Among the large and small groups of Divine King, there were a dozen or so groups that were the most powerful. Many great experts who had reached the late Divine King realm were rejected when they tried to join these groups, as they were not qualified. The group led by Jiana was one of the dozen or so most powerful groups. Not only did they gather many supreme god kings from the god king's throne, but they even had a few god artifacts as well. At this moment, 2 people were seated in the air in the group led by Jiana. They were resting with their eyes closed, as if they did not care about the conflict in the outside world. The 2 of them were Gong Zheng and Bai Yi, who had attacked Jianshan together with a few others. Now, Gong Zheng and Bai Yi had revealed their original appearances and were openly exposed to the crowd. They did not care if someone recognized them, and went to Ming Dong to claim the high reward. Gong Zheng, Bai Yi, how are your injuries? A burly middle-aged man walked over. He glanced at Gong Zheng and Bai Yi. The middle-aged man was Jiana. Perhaps many of the Divine King in the Poseidon Palace did not recognize Jiana, but over 90% of the cultivators were familiar with his name. This was because Jiana was an extremely powerful supreme Divine King below the Divine King. He was already ranked in the top 100 at 99th place. This was a very high ranking. Gong Zheng and Bai Yi opened their eyes. Their gazes gathered on Jiana as they became solemn. With Brother Jiana's divine nullification pill, most of the injuries to our souls have recovered. Although it will still take a very long time to fully recover, it won't affect our strength much anymore. Gong Zheng will remember Brother Jiana's assistance today. If there's an opportunity in the future, I will definitely repay you. Gong Zheng stood up and clasped his hands at Jiana. Bai Yi stood up as well and clasped his hands at Jiana as well, exchanging some pleasantries. If Jiana hadn't given him a divine grade pill, the divine nullification pill, which was specially used to heal injuries to the primordial spirit, his primordial spirit definitely wouldn't have been able to recover to this extent. Jiana laughed and said, "Our sect has a close relationship with your absolute sword sect. It's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning. The 2 of you make your preparations. We're about to move out. I hope that with our combined strength, we'll be able to fully utilize the defensive power of the Rising Sun Sacred Light Pearl. That way, we'll be able to last a little longer in the lava, and our chances of finding that little girl will greatly increase." Soon, Jiana gathered everyone and took out the Sunrise Holy Light Pearl. He was prepared to work with everyone to activate the Sunrise Holy Light Pearl and dive into the lava. At the same time, many people from the other groups had already begun to move. Every group had at least one defensive artifact. Then, They used various methods and combined the power of many people to push the artifact to the limit. They used the protection of the artifact to enter the depths of the lava. However, at this moment, a powerful pulse of energy appeared in the distance. An azure figure appeared in the distance, turning into an illusionary azure punk. He used his speed to flee in an extremely horrible manner. Behind him, 6 figures radiated the light of laws as they pursued him relentlessly, unleashing powerful attacks that mercilessly bombarded the fleeing people in front of them. That person is Ming Dong. The person being hunted down by Ming Dong is a supreme divine king. I seem to remember that the person who fled seemed to be one of the people who attacked Jianshan. I never thought that he would be hunted down so miserably by Ming Dong. That's the Azure Peng's movement technique. Anyone who can use it must be under the Azure Peng King. I wonder what Ming Dong's background is. He doesn't even fear the Azure Peng King. The Azure Peng King is known for being protective. A few divine kings saw this from afar, and their eyes all narrowed as they sighed in amazement. Boom! At this moment, a muffled boom suddenly rang out. The dozen or so volcanoes in the surroundings erupted at the same time. Terrifying lava formed a dozen or so huge pillars of fire that soared into the sky. Then, they scattered in all directions in the sky, enveloping the entire area and causing a rain of lava to fall. The space on the 8th floor had always been very unstable. Battles between regular divine kings could lead to erupting volcanoes, so the divine kings gathered here needed to conceal their presences carefully. However, Ming Dong chased after Tsang Ying aggressively with the 5 divine generals. He struck out fearlessly, erupting with the might of a supreme divine king. The powerful ripples of energy from his destructive power immediately broke the peace there and caused the volcanoes nearby to erupt. Oh no, dodge! The expressions of all the divine kings gathered here changed when they saw the dense rain of lava in the sky. They fled in all directions as quickly as they could. Even the supreme divine king on the divine king was forced to dodge. He did not dare to come in contact with the lava. Even though the lava was only the size of raindrops, it was not something that a divine king could endure. This was because the temperature was over 10,000 times hotter than the core of a sun. At this moment, Ming Dong had already caught up to Tsang Ying. His eyes were cold as killing intent surged. He gathered the power of destruction in his sword and directly swung it at Tsang Ying, causing Tsang Ying to constantly vomit blood. The azure pung scales that protected him dimmed as well. Ming Dong's attack was nothing to be underestimated. Terrifying ripples of energy swept through the surroundings as a terrifying storm, causing even more volcanoes to erupt. Boom, 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 boom. Immediately, heavy booms rang out incessantly. With Ming Dong as the center, all the volcanoes within several 100,000 kilometers roused from their slumber. They erupted one after another, and pillars of lava seemed to transform into furious roaring dragons as they rushed into the sky. They formed a rain of lava with terrifying heat as they rained down with many divine fire crystals. The entire 8th floor trembled violently. The fire elemental power in the surroundings became abnormally violent. Even the sea of lava beneath everyone's feet surged with great waves. In a single moment, screams rang out everywhere. Many god kings were unable to dodge in time under such a dense rain of lava. They were all injured by the rain of lava. Either their entire bodies were set ablaze, or holes were melted into their bodies. Oh no, there are too many people gathered here. Even though they've concealed their presences, there's still an invisible presence interfering with this place. It's silently destroying the stability of these volcanoes, causing them to erupt with unprecedented intensity. Chapter 2169. For a moment, shouts rang out everywhere. The many divine kings gathered in the world of volcanoes dodged the rain of fire with ugly expressions as they called out to Ming Dong. Some of the more powerful divine kings either wore supreme quality saint artifacts or directly used god artifacts to protect themselves as they charged towards Ming Dong with lightning speed. They wanted to stop Ming Dong from fighting on this floor. All fighting is forbidden on the 8th floor. Stop immediately, or you'll be treating all of us as your enemies. Sir, there are far too many divine kings gathered on this floor. They've already destroyed the stability of the volcanoes. Even the slightest ripple of energy will cause the volcanoes to erupt. I don't care what grievances you have between the two of you. Stop fighting on this floor and conceal your presences obediently. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. Furious shouts rang out. Over 20 divine kings stood before Ming Dong. Every single one of them was extremely powerful, and over half of them even possessed god artifacts. Even more people fended off the rain of lava as they watched on from afar. It's actually Ming Dong, the person protected by the divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing. A few divine kings in the crowd knew Ming Dong's identity, and their faces changed slightly. They originally wanted to stop Ming Dong, but they came to a halt. Although they did not know what kind of relationship Ming Dong had with the heavenly palace of Bishing, or whether he was really the disciple of one of the majesties, they dared not offend him as long as he had even the slightest connection to the heavenly palace of Bishing. Bai Yi and Gong Zheng discovered Ming Dong as well. They looked at each other and saw sternness in each other's eyes. In such a short amount of time, 4 of the 8 divine kings who had attacked Jianshun had died. The 5th, Song Ying, had fled in horrible shape. They were extremely fearful of such strength. So he's Ming Dong. I've heard a lot about him in the past few days. Jiana looked at Ming Dong, who was stopped by over 20 divine kings from afar. He could not help but sneer. Afterwards, he arrived before Gong Zheng and looked at Gong Zheng's furrowed brows. He could not help but laugh aloud. Gong Zheng, I know the two of you are Ming Dong's targets as well, but you don't have to worry. Ming Dong won't dare to touch you here. I wonder where this Ming Dong came from. He really is a little too arrogant. A divine king in Gatto's temporary group said coldly. Song Ying had already stopped running. He hovered in the air like a hawk and looked at Ming Dong with lingering fear. He was also filled with lingering fear. Ming Dong was even more powerful than he had imagined. He had no doubt that if it were not for the warning from the Azure Pung scale and the Azure Pung movement, it would have been very difficult for him to escape from Ming Dong. Song Ying, why don't you join our group? If you have to, it'll be very difficult for you to protect yourself if you continue to be alone in your current state. Gong Zheng suddenly said to Song Ying secretly, inviting him to join. Song Ying's eyes immediately lit up when he saw that it was Gong Zheng. Afterwards, he discovered Bai Yi standing with Gong Zheng, so he did not hesitate at all and joined Gong Zheng's group without any hesitation. The 3 of them knew that Ming Dong had placed a bounty on them, so they must have been on Ming Dong's kill list long ago. With the strength that Ming Dong had displayed, fighting him alone was clearly an extremely unwise choice. Only by working together would they have the ability to fend him off. Ming Dong naturally discovered Bai Yi and Gong Zheng as well. Although this was the first time he had met the 2 of them, he had already gathered all the information he could find about the 2 of them during the past few days. Bai Yi, Gong Zheng, I never thought that the 2 of you would be here as well. The heavens really are on my side. Today, I'll kill all of you as well. I'll use the divine blood that flows in your bodies to pay tribute to my brother's soul in heaven. Ming Dong looked at the 3 of them from afar. His cold voice was filled with undisguised killing intent. Afterwards, he looked at the 20 or so divine kings blocking his way. Not only did he not show any fear, but he instead became slightly crazed. He growled, "Anyone who gets in my way of revenge will become my greatest enemy. Do you really want to stop me?" As he spoke, a powerful presence began to gather from Ming Dong. It seemed like a storm was brewing. At that moment, Ming Dong was cold and domineering. He was unyielding. Anyone could tell that the 2 of them were already on the verge of clashing with weapons at the slightest disagreement. The 20 or so divine kings blocking Ming Dong all sneered when they heard Ming Dong's threat. Their faces were filled with disdain and mockery. Not only were the 20 or so people extremely powerful, but they were all supreme divine kings below the divine kings. Moreover, their backgrounds were extremely illustrious as well. Every single one of them had the backing of a peak clan or sect, so they did not take Ming Dong's threats seriously at all. In particular, there was a young man in red robes among the 20 or so divine kings. His name was Xian Long, and he was renowned for his fiery temper. He could not tolerate Ming Dong acting arrogantly in front of him at all. As a result, he immediately sneered when he heard Ming Dong's threat. His gaze became extremely hostile. He took a step forward coldly. However, just when Xian Long was about to say something, a voice suddenly rang out. Xian Long, you can't provoke this Ming Dong, or it'll cause great trouble for your clan. Do you know who the 5 guard behind Ming Dong are? They're divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing. This sound came from Xian Long's mouth. Aside from Xian Long, no one else could hear it. However, when Xian Long heard that, his face immediately changed. He directly looked past Ming Dong and at the 5 guards. Disbelief filled his face. Huang Baiyun, are you certain that the 5 of them are divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing? Xian Long asked secretly as his face became uneasy. His fiery temper had been forcefully suppressed by the appearance of his identity as a divine general of the heavenly palace of Bishing. It's absolutely true. When the 5 of them entered the Azure Poseidon Palace, the armor they wore was the standard armor of the heavenly palace of Bishing. The person replied with absolute certainty. Having received confirmation, Xian Long's face immediately became stern. He deeply glanced at Ming Dong before clasping his hands at him. Without saying anything else, he turned around and left. He did not dare to stick his nose in other people's business. Although Xian Long had a fiery temper, he was no fool. He knew who he could ignore and who he could not provoke. Although he did not know Ming Dong's identity, he definitely could not provoke him since he had 5 divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing behind him. Even though it was rumored in the Saints' world that the Eneta Grand Prime had died many years ago, the heavenly palace of Bishing would never fall as long as the majesties of the heavenly palace of Bishing remained. In particular, the first majesty was a terrifying figure who could strike fear into the hearts of many peak organizations across the 49 Great Plains and 81 Great Planets. Chapter 2170. Xian Long's sudden change stunned all the people in the surroundings. Even the 20 or so divine kings who had come to stop Ming Dong with Xian Long were clearly stunned. With Xian Long's previous attitude and expression, anyone could tell with a single glance that he was targeting Ming Dong. Many people were already prepared to watch a good show. However, they never thought that the result would be so surprising. Xian Long actually turned around and left without saying anything. Wasn't his actions announcing to everyone that he wasn't going to stop Ming Dong? And when he left, he even clasped his fist towards Ming Dong in a friendly manner. Who was Xian Long? Not only was he a supreme God King on the God King's throne, but his background was rather great as well. In the eyes of many people, Xian Long was an unreachable existence that they could only look up to. Yet now, he had become frightened from Ming Dong's threat. Everyone found this unbelievable. Xian Long's fear caused the expressions of the supreme God Kings who stopped Ming Dong to change slightly. They all studied Ming Dong as they became surprised and doubtful. Song Ying, Bai Yi, and Gong Zheng, who had already gathered together, all had very ugly expressions. Xian Long had completely disregarded his dignity as a supreme divine king just because of Ming Dong's threat. They could all tell just how terrifying Xian Long's fear of Ming Dong was. Xian Long's ranking on the divine king's throne is quite high. He's extremely powerful, yet he doesn't dare to offend Ming Dong. Just who is this Ming Dong? Bai growled. Song Ying and Gong Zheng both shook their heads. Ming Dong's name had always been unknown. It was only recently that it had gradually spread through the Tsang Poseidon Palace. They knew nothing about his identity and background. At this moment, a few more of the 20 or so supreme divine kings in Ming Dong's way received a message. As a result, all of their faces changed without exception. A smear of shock appeared in their eyes. They were greatly surprised. They looked deeply at Ming Dong and the 5 divine generals behind him before clasping their fists and leaving together. With that, only a dozen or so of the 20 or so divine kings in Ming Dong's way remained. However, the dozen or so divine kings all looked at each other. Hesitation appeared on their faces as if they were stuck in a dilemma. Clearly, they had also realized that Ming Dong's identity was not to be underestimated. Otherwise, he would not have made so many supreme divine kings fear him. At the same time, another dozen or so divine kings arrived at the entrance to the 8th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace from the 7th floor. A young man and a young woman walked at the very front of the group. The other divine kings followed behind them like guards. Junior Mu, you have to be careful on the 8th floor. Whether it's the volcanoes or the lava below, they're all extraordinary. They're extremely terrifying. Even the supreme divine kings of the divine kings need to be careful here. The handsome young man with the extraordinary bearing at the very front looked at the veiled woman beside him gently. His voice was gentle and filled with undisguised admiration. The two of them were Jun Kong and Shangwan Mu who had hurried over from the Taoist sect of divine sound on the Skyfire Plain. The divine kings behind them were all disciples of the Taoist sect of divine sound. Shangwan Mu hovered in the air as she stared at the world of volcanoes with her enchanting eyes. Her face, hidden beneath the veil, actually showed some emotion at that moment. He's been here before. Shangwan Mu thought. As soon as she set foot on the 8th floor, she experienced a profound and wondrous feeling. She could sense that Jianshan had been here before, which caused ripples to appear in her cold, emotionless heart. She felt extremely excited. Jun Kong did not sense the subtle changes in Shangwan Mu. He said leisurely, "The main reason why we've come to the Tsang Poseidon Palace this time is to go to the 12th floor and find a way to awaken the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry. As a result, we don't need to stop for too long along the way. Let's directly go to the 12th floor. Junior Mu, you don't have any objections, right? You go to the 12th floor first. I want to take a look around here," said Shangwan Mu. With that, she left by herself. She began to search for Jianshan with a throbbing heart. "Junior Mu, be careful. It's very dangerous here." Jun Kong immediately chased after her. Deep concern filled his face as he said gently, "Since Junior Mu wants to take a look around here, I'll accompany you. Although this space is filled with danger, where the volcanoes can erupt at any time, you don't have to worry too much with me by your side." As they spoke, they had already arrived 10,000 kilometers away. However, at this moment, Jun Kong's eyes suddenly narrowed. He stared ahead and immediately became stern. He said sternly, "So many powerful presences. Strange, why are there so many divine kings gathered up there? And there are quite a few divine kings as well." Jun Kong's expression changed a few times before he suddenly stopped Shangwan Mu. He said sternly, "Junior Mu, stay here and don't move. I'll go take a look and see what's going on there for so many divine kings to gather together." Jun Kong got over a dozen divine kings from the Taoist sect of divine sound to protect Shangwan Mu, while he flew off by himself, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Very soon, Jun Kong arrived in the region where all the divine kings had gathered. As soon as he arrived, he just happened to see Ming Dong facing off against over a dozen divine kings, which made Jun Kong shiver inside. Many of the divine kings are stronger than me, but they clearly don't possess enough presence against the 6 of them. As a matter of fact, they don't give off any presence at all. Who are the 6 of them? They're actually able to make over a dozen divine kings fear them so much. Jun Kong was greatly shocked when he saw this. He was unable to remain calm. Afterwards, Jun Kong asked a few divine kings nearby about the reason why so many divine kings had gathered here. It said that they're all looking for a girl protected by the world, which is why they've all gathered here. It's rumored that whoever obtains the girl will gain control of the Poseidon Palace. In the end, the girl was taken away by a person called Jianshan. Afterwards, when Jianshan fled here with the girl, he was slain by a divine king. The girl seems to have fallen into the lava as well. The divine kings answered Jun Kong's questions in a simple manner. Even though they did not possess a lot of information, they were able to give a rough explanation. However, when Jun Kong heard the name Jianshan, his heart shuddered violently. He immediately asked, "Is this person called Jianshan the young man who comprehended the laws of the sword and seemed to be in his 20s? It seems to be him. That's right. It's him." Although I've never seen Jinshin before, I've heard about him. The characteristics you mentioned completely match. Jun Kong became overjoyed when he received confirmation. He could not help but laugh aloud. Perhaps there would be many people with the same name in the Saints world, but it would be impossible for them to come across people with the same name and characteristics. As a result, Jun Kong was basically certain that the Jinshin who had died here was the person his junior sister Mu, or had admired for a very long time. Ha ha, Jinshin, I never thought you'd actually die here. The heavens really are on my side. The heavens really are on my side. I was planning on finding people to kill you on the cloud plane after this trip to the Poseidon Palace, but I never thought you'd already die in the Poseidon Palace. It looks like the heavens are on my side. The heavens are helping me and junior sister Muir. Jun Kong was extremely overjoyed by Jinshin's death. He was so emotional that he lost himself and roared out as if he wanted to vent his emotions. Jun Kong's voice was not very loud, but the people gathered here were all powerful Godhead experts. They could clearly hear any sound from 1,000 kilometers away, so Jun Kong's voice naturally rang out in everyone's ears. Originally, no one would treat this kind of emotional venting as a big deal, but Jun Kong just happened to mention the extremely sensitive name of Jinshin. Immediately, all the divine kings gathered in the surroundings looked at Jun Kong. All of their expressions were strange, and some of them even looked at him with schadenfreude. The divine kings who answered Jun Kong's question paled in fright. They cursed inside. Of all the people you could curse, you just had to curse Jinshin. Don't you know that as soon as Jinshin died, a vicious person called Ming Dong appeared? He directly hunted down divine kings in the Poseidon Palace, directly leading to the deaths of 4 divine kings. If you want to die, don't drag us into it. Chapter 2171. Who is this idiot? He's actually exposing his enmity towards Jinshin at a time like this. And he's even saying that he wants to kill Jinshin. Doesn't he know that someone called Jinshin is currently taking revenge for Jinshin? Or is it that both his strength and background are enough to crush Ming Dong, so he doesn't fear Ming Dong's threat at all? I just happen to know this person. He's a supreme, divine king from the Taoist sect of divine sound on the Skyfire plane. His name is Jun Kong. I never thought he'd come to the Tsang Poseidon Palace as well. The Taoist sect of divine sound? I've heard Master mention this sect before. In the past, the Taoist sect of divine sound was a peak organization renowned throughout the Saints world because of the third ancestor. Even with the entire Saints world in perspective, very few people dared to provoke them. It's just a pity that after the third ancestor died, the Taoist sect of divine sound declined as well. Probably very few people still remember this sect in the Saints world. If the third ancestor of the Taoist sect of divine sound was still around, there really would be no one who would dare to offend Jun Kong in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. As for now, the divine kings gathered there discussed softly. They all looked at Jun Kong. They either sneered or shook their heads and sighed. As a divine king, Jun Kong was extremely powerful. Although the news of Jinshin's death had made him emotional, he immediately sensed it when so many people looked at him. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. The strange atmosphere made his heart tighten, and his laughter came to a halt. However, at this moment, an extremely powerful pulse of energy appeared. A strand of sword chi that was several meters long shot over. With the pure and dense power of the laws of destruction, it slashed towards Jun Kong mercilessly. Jun Kong's entire body suddenly shuddered when the sword chi locked onto him. He suddenly turned his head to look at the incoming sword chi. At the same time, his face was filled with confusion and sternness. The sword chi was so powerful that it shocked him. In particular, the laws of destruction within the sword chi that seemed capable of obliterating everything gave him the misconception that he was invincible. A jade flute silently appeared in Jun Kong's hand. He was stern as he stood with the jade flute in his hand. As soon as he began to play, a soul-stirring sound rang out. It was as beautiful as heavenly music, reaching the depths of everyone's soul and intoxicating them. As the sound of the flute rang out, ripples visible to the naked eye appeared. They were like sharp arrows that shot toward the incoming sword chi. Boom! 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 The sound waves collided with the sword qi, producing a string of deafening booms. Jun Kong used his way of music to control the power of the flute to fend off the sword qi that contained the laws of destruction. However, the sword qi was just too powerful. With Jun Kong's strength as a divine king, dealing with it was still rather difficult. The several hundred sound waves he sent out in an instant only have the power of the sword qi. At that moment, the sword qi that contained the laws of destruction had already arrived before him. A vicious light flashed through Jun Kong's eyes. He bellowed out and swung the jade flute in his hand, smashing it against the sword qi that was only half as powerful as before with all the power of his cultivation. With a boom, the sword qi was finally dispersed by Jun Kong. However, Jun Kong was reduced to a horrible shape as well. His luxurious robes had become tattered in many places. When the two of them struck out, the shockwaves of energy destroyed the stability of the volcanoes in the surroundings once again. Immediately, several dozen volcanoes erupted at the same time. Lava mixed with many fire divine crystals fell from the sky as a dense rain of fire, frightening all the divine kings who were covered by the rain of fire. They all dodged in a hurry. That flute is quite impressive. It's actually resonated with my mind, and I can't help but become intoxicated by it. As expected of a supreme prodigy of the Taoist sect of divine sound, his mastery of music has indeed broadened my horizons. It's just that it's a little too short. In the distance, a supreme divine king could not help but praise. It's said that the Taoist sect of divine sound's music has stolen the mysteries of the world, and it can derive the ways of the world. I wonder if that's true. Let's not talk about anything else. Just that beautiful music is enough for me to pay a visit to the Taoist sect of divine sound. In that moment earlier, I was almost affected by the flute. Many divine kings discussed among themselves in the surroundings, but Jun Kong was in no mood to listen to their praises. At that moment, his face was sunken as he stared at the young man before him with an ugly expression. His excitement from Jinshin's death had completely vanished. "Friend, may I ask how I've offended you for you to attack me for no reason?" Jun Kong clasped his fist and said with an ugly expression. His gaze towards the young man before him was filled with extremely deep fear. To no surprise, the young man before him was Ming Dong. The 5 divine generals followed closely behind Ming Dong. They were all emotionless, and their gazes were cold. "You seem to be very happy that Jinshin is dead. What grievances do you have with Jinshin? And who's this Mua you speak of?" Ming Dong stood before Jun Kong as his presence surged. He was extremely powerful as he spoke coldly. Jun Kong hesitated. He had just entered Poseidon Palace, so he had no idea that Ming Dong was avenging Jinshin. For a moment, he was rather unsure about the relationship between Ming Dong and Jinshin. "Friend, this is between me and Jinshin. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with you," Jun Kong said carefully. He had personally witnessed the young man clashing with over a dozen divine kings, and from how the young man did not seem to take the divine king seriously at all. He could not afford to offend someone like that. "Is the Mu'er? You speak of Shangwan Mu'er?" Ming Dong continued to ask. When Ming Dong mentioned Shangwan Mu'er's name, Jun Kong's eyes immediately narrowed. He stared at the young man who seemed like a god of slaughter in shock as disbelief filled his face. Although he did not dare to claim that he knew everything about Shangwan Mu'er, he had a rough idea. He knew that Shangwan Mu'er had come up from a lower world, and she had not been in the saint's world for very long. She was a nameless, insignificant figure. However, how did the powerful divine king know someone like that? This clearly did not make sense. If Shangwan Mu'er knew this person, Jun Kong would never believe it. Who knew how long this divine king had cultivated for? Shangwan Mu'er had only come to the saint's world recently, and her cultivation was nothing special. How did she know someone of such great status? Jun Kong did not reply, but Ming Dong already knew the answer from his expression alone. "I understand now. You covet Shangwan Mu'er's beauty, and because Jinshin is Shangwan Mu'er's husband, he's stopping you from pursuing Shangwan Mu'er. As a result, you want Jinshin to die. Am I right?" Ming Dong said coldly as his gaze became extremely piercing. Jun Kong's face changed, and he could not help but stagger backwards. He stared at Jianshun in shock as his heart churned. Not only did this young man know about Shangwan Mu but he even knew about the relationship between Shangwan Mu and Jianshun. How was that possible? Even in the Taoist sect of divine sound, only the two elders and a few ancestors knew about the relationship between Shangwan Mu and Jianshun. So how did this young man know about it? Jianshun is my brother who has gone through thick and thin with me, while Shangwan Mu is my sister-in-law. Not only do you want to take my sister-in-law, but you want to kill my brother as well. You're courting death, Ming Dong said through gritted teeth. His terrifying gaze was basically tempting to rip Jun Kong to pieces. He immediately raised his sword and swung it at Jun Kong with the laws of destruction. This time, Ming Dong struck out furiously, so it was much more powerful than before. Chapter 2172. Impossible. This is impossible. This is definitely impossible. Jun Kong shook his head and said softly. His shock had already reached its limit, making him extremely shocked. Whether it was Shangwan Mu or Jianshun's origins, he knew everything. However, in his eyes, Jianshun had always been as weak as an ant. Now that he suddenly possessed such a powerful brother, he was unable to accept this no matter what. He was even more unable to accept that the junior sister Mu he admired was actually the sister-in-law of the divine king before him. So there's actually a relationship like this between Ming Dong and Jianshun. No wonder Jianshun's death made Ming Dong go crazy, where he went as far as to offend those peak organizations just to kill the divine kings. As it turns out, he's actually a friend who has gone through thick and thin with him. That's a friendship where he can completely entrust his life to the other person. As a matter of fact, the other person's life is even more important than his own. Their friendship is so deep that it completely surpasses the friendship between fellow disciples. The divine kings in the surroundings came to a realization as well. However, Song Ying, Gong Zheng, and Bai Yi's hearts sank as their faces became very ugly. The relationship between Jianshun and Ming Dong was far deeper than they had expected. At this moment, Ming Dong's sword had already swung towards Jun Kong with the power of the laws of destruction. As the presence of destruction permeated the surroundings, it seemed like it wanted to destroy everything. Although Jun Kong was momentarily stunned, he was still a supreme God King who had made it onto the God King's throne after all. At the moment of life and death, he immediately reacted. With a flip of his hand, a palm-sized bell silently appeared in his hand before suddenly expanding to several meters in size. It completely enveloped him. Thump! When Ming Dong's strike with the laws of destruction landed on the bell, it immediately produced a heavy chime. The terrifying sound wave turned into visible ripples that expanded in all directions. This sound wave also contained an extremely strong offensive power. When the sound wave spread, it caused the sea of lava below to churn violently. Volcanoes began to erupt one after another. A large amount of lava turned into a rain of fire in the sky, one after another, and continued to rain down. Ming Dong placed his sword before himself to block the incoming sound wave. He stared at the undamaged bell coldly and said coldly, "Do you think I can't do anything to you just because you have a defensive god artifact?" As he said that, a set of armor silently appeared, protecting every inch of Ming Dong's body. When the lava rain landed on the armor, it actually failed to damage it at all. The armor was clearly a defensive god artifact. Afterwards, Ming Dong suddenly put away the supreme quality saint artifact sword in his hand and replaced it with a god artifact sword. Under the condensation of the laws of destruction, it immediately erupted with surging power, slashing at the bell viciously. Boom! This was an intense confrontation between two divine artifacts. The sound of thunder was deafening, and the terrifying energy shock waves swept out like torrential waves. They wreaked havoc between heaven and earth, and even the rain of fire that filled the sky became erratic. The bell that trapped Jun Kong was knocked far away by Ming Dong's strike as well. It only stopped several thousand meters away. Jun Kong appeared below the bell. He stared at Ming Dong, who was shrouded in killing intent with a sunken face. As the Divine King, the prodigy of the Taoist sect of Divine Sound, he obviously had his pride and dignity. Even though he knew about Ming Dong's great background, he still found it difficult to hold back his anger after being attacked by Ming Dong time and time again. Moreover, he could already tell that Ming Dong wanted to kill him. As for the Taoist sect of Divine Sound behind Ming Dong, it was clearly nothing more than a decoration now. It posed no threat at all. The sound of the jade flute rang out slowly. It was like a pillar of the heavens, beautiful like heavenly music. It slowly rang out with an enchanting charm. Jun Kong blocked the lava rain with the bell above his head. He stood below the bell and played the jade flute, using the way of music against his opponent. He used the sound of the flute to control his opponent's soul, disturbing their minds and messing up their souls. He used the sound waves as a sword, piercing through space and injuring his opponent's body. Jun Kong began to fight back as hard as he could against Ming Dong's killing intent. If you want to mess with my mind with just you, go cultivate for another few hundred years. Ming Dong snorted coldly. Right now, he was protected by a god artifact, which made him invulnerable. He was as valiant as a god of war as he wielded his god artifact sword. He smashed through the lava rain like a hot knife through butter and arrived before Jun Kong. The battle between the two of them was not exactly intense. Only the terrifying ripples of energy from the collision of the two god artifacts wreaked havoc in the surroundings, causing volcanoes to erupt. The sea of lava below them churned with surging waves. Scarlet flames filled the sky as red light filled the sky. Jun Kong remained unscathed from Ming Dong's numerous attacks with his defensive god artifact. However, using a god artifact was extremely taxing on any supreme divine king. He could not last for long at all. His face had already paled, showing signs of exhaustion. Boom! Finally, under another attack from Ming Dong, Jun Kong finally ran out of energy to maintain the defenses of the bell. He put it away and immediately vomited blood. He was heavily injured. How dare you lay your hands on my brother's woman and my sister-in-law? You won't be spared today. Ming Dong's voice was cold. Killing intent surged as he put away his god artifact. He launched a barrage of attacks at Jun Kong with his fists. His fists and palms changed as his knees and legs danced. With great power, he unleashed a brutal, excruciating torture on Jun Kong's body. Although Ming Dong had no grievances with Jun Kong, Ming Dong's hatred towards him was even greater than the 8 divine kings who had attacked Jianshan. He wanted to torture Jun Kong properly before he died. Jun Kong was unable to fight back at all. He was completely suppressed by Ming Dong. Like a sandbag, he was thrown around in the air by Ming Dong's attacks. Not only was there no skin on his body, but all his bones and organs had been shattered by Ming Dong's fists as well. His bloodied face had already become twisted and deformed. Even his skull had cracked. He was in an extremely horrible state. Jun Kong's soul was still present, so he was not dead. He glared at Ming Dong furiously as his hatred surged, but there was nothing he could do. Chapter 2173. The surroundings were filled with people long ago. Many divine kings hovered high in the sky as they watched silently. Some of the more ordinary divine kings were extremely shocked when they witnessed Ming Dong's strength. Fear appeared in their eyes as they looked at Ming Dong. As for the divine kings, they remained emotionless and did nothing. They watched on calmly, and no one stepped forward to stop the battle. Even though their battle caused the volcanoes in the surroundings to erupt violently, they all acted like it had nothing to do with them. The retreat of the 20 or so divine kings had alarmed them. They truly realized that Ming Dong's background was probably not to be trifled with. Therefore, they naturally wouldn't provoke a powerful enemy just because of a small matter that was insignificant to them. Only when it was related to their own core interests would they step forward bravely regardless of the consequences. At this moment, Ming Dong's interest in Jun Kong had waned. He stopped punching and kicking Jun Kong and drew his supreme quality Saint Artifact's sword again. Killing intent revolved around him as he stabbed at Jun Kong's forehead decisively. Jun Kong had lost his ability to fight long ago, and even his cultivation had been sealed up by Ming Dong through a secret technique. He was unable to dodge Ming Dong's attack at all. Even though many divine kings had gathered in the surroundings, including many from the Skyfire plane, no one stepped forward to help him. This was because they all understood Ming Dong's personality and methods. They knew that if they stepped forward now, not only would they not be able to save Jun Kong, but they would also be dragged into the matter as well. In the end, they would only invite trouble onto themselves. Stop! However, at this moment, a delicate voice suddenly rang out. It was gentle and pleasant, like the chirping of a skylark. Many of the god kings in the surroundings were stunned by the voice. Anyone could tell with a single glance that Ming Dong wanted to kill Jun Kong. No one could stop him. Once they stepped forward, they would definitely suffer a horrible fate. However, there just so happened to be someone who wasn't afraid of angering Ming Dong, stepping forward at a time like this. This immediately drew the attention of many divine king as they looked towards the source of the voice in surprise. The veiled Shangwanmu shot over with lightning speed from afar, with over a dozen divine king from the Taoist sect of divine sound. They directly flew towards Ming Dong. Ming Dong's attack towards Jun Kong's forehead came to a halt. He looked at the rapidly approaching Shangwanmu and naturally recognized her with a single glance. Shangwanmu was the first person Ming Dong had met since they parted on the Tianyuan continent. Originally, the meeting between the two of them was something worth celebrating, but Jinshin's death made it impossible for Ming Dong to feel happy no matter what. All he could do was suppress the flames of hatred and vengeance in his heart, filling his entire chest. Sister-in-law, you want to save him? Or do you want to kill him yourself? Ming Dong pointed the tip of his sword at Jun Kong's forehead. His killing intent did not decrease at all as he turned around and asked Shangwanmu. He was not excited at all, nor was there any joy. His emotions did not fluctuate at all. His voice was extremely cold. In reality, Ming Dong could tell that Shangwanmu's current cultivation had already reached the level of a divine king. Ming Dong was extremely puzzled by how Shangwanmu had reached such a level of cultivation in such a short amount of time. At the same time, he had many questions. However, the death of his best friend filled him with grief and indignation, almost destroying his rationality. All that was left in his heart was revenge. Revenge! Revenge! Shangwanmu stared at Ming Dong closely. Her eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. She knew that Jinshin had always been thinking about Ming Dong, who had suddenly vanished on the 9th floor of the Inata Tower. After coming to the Saint's World, he had thought about looking for Ming Dong more than once. However, she had never thought that Jinshin, who had vanished from the Tianyuan continent for so long, would suddenly appear in Poseidon Palace and possess such a powerful cultivation. Jinshin, I finally found you. Did you know that Jinshin had always been thinking about you while you were gone? As a matter of fact, when he first arrived in the Saint's World, and before he had truly become powerful, he wanted to embark on the long journey to find you. Shangwanmu said softly. She did not mention Jun Kong. Ming Dong's eyes were filled with sorrow. He closed his eyes in pain as 2 tears rolled down uncontrollably. How could he not think about Jinshin, who had gone through life and death with him on the Tianyuan continent? However, when he embarked on his journey to find Jinshin, all he received was news of Jinshin's death. Ming Dong sucked in a deep breath. When he opened his eyes again, they were filled with emotionless coldness. He said again, Sister-in-law, did you stop me from killing him earlier to save him? Or did you want to kill him personally? Shangwanmu's gaze finally landed on Jun Kong. Her expression did not change at all as she looked at Jun Kong, who was like a dead dog. She said, Jun Kong is my senior brother from the same sect. I am indebted to his master. Ming Dong, let him go. Let him go. Ming Dong's gaze suddenly became piercing. He called out emotionally, Do you know that this person already wants to kill my brother, yet you want me to let him go? Can you face my brother like this? Can you face my brother's soul in heaven? At this moment, Ming Dong seemed to have lost his mind. He was like a mad lion. Shangwanmu's words had made him extremely disappointed and furious. If I insist on killing him, will you stop me? Ming Dong roared out. He was extremely emotional. I will. Shangguan said calmly. Jun Kong's master is one of the 4 ancestors of the Taoist sect of divine sound. I am indebted to him in the past. I saved him this time because of his master. It has nothing to do with Jun Kong himself. From now on, even if Jun Kong encounters danger again, it won't have anything to do with me. Ming Dong sucked in a few deep breaths after hearing Shangguan explanation. He slowly calmed down and said, "All right, if that's the case, I'll spare him for sister-in-law's sake." Ming Dong stowed his sword away and stared at Jun Kong coldly. He directly kicked Jun Kong away and bellowed out, "Piss off!" Jun Kong's body was caught by the Divine King from the Taoist sect of divine sound in a fluster. Various healing pills were poured into Jun Kong's mouth without any regard for the cost. Ming Dong did not exchange too many pleasantries with Shangguan. Instead, he turned around and made his way towards Gongzheng by Yi and Songying. Although his presence was powerful, his figure seemed bleak and lonely. Chapter 2174. As a supreme prodigy of the Taoist sect of divine sound and a supreme divine king below the divine king, it was already difficult for Jun Kong to endure Ming Dong's humiliating beating. He had already become furious. Now that he saw his junior Mu'er, whom he admired, not only did she not console him after he had suffered such great injuries, but she even treated him coldly instead, cutting off all ties with him. Jun Kong was immediately infuriated. He could not help but vomit blood. Afterwards, Jun Kong seemed to be greatly provoked. He laughed aloud with his distorted mouth and mumbled, "Jianshun? You're still thinking about Jianshun? Ha! Shangguan, you probably don't know, but the Jianshun you've always been thinking about is already dead. He's really dead this time. His corpse is buried in the lava below your feet. You can forget about seeing Jianshun for the rest of your life." Ha ha! Jun Kong became more and more emotional as he spoke, as if Jianshun's death was the only thing that could make him feel better and relieve his pain. However, to Jun Kong's disappointment, he did not see any grief from Shangguan. She remained emotionless, without any emotions at all. "I'll leave Jun Kong to you. Don't follow me. I don't need your protection," Shangguan said to the divine kings around Jun Kong. The divine kings from the Taoist sect of divine sound looked at each other. They were troubled, having no idea what to do. On the other side, Gongzheng, by Yi, and Songying's expressions immediately became extremely ugly when they saw Ming Dong slowly approach them like a god of slaughter. Now, the 3 of them no longer hoped that the supreme divine kings gathered here would step forward to stop Ming Dong. After everything that had happened, Ming Dong's current might was enough to suffocate them, the 3 divine kings. Perhaps because he could see Gongzheng's worry, Jianna patted Gongzheng's shoulder and said sternly, "Gongzheng, don't worry too much. Since you're the successor of the solitary sword lineage, I definitely won't let anything happen to you here. Leave everything to me." With that, Jianna took a step forward and looked at Ming Dong. He said sternly, "Ming Dong, I hope you can stop before you go too far. Now that so many of us have gathered here, we are not here to see you seek revenge. Don't let your personal grudge affect us all and delay us from doing more important things." With that, a powerful presence radiated from Jianna, blanketing the surroundings, causing the lava below him to churn violently like a tsunami. Jianna's presence was so powerful that it had far surpassed most supreme divine kings. After all, he was an expert who ranked 99th before the divine king. Just this ranking alone was enough to make him look down on all opponents of the same level. As expected, as soon as Jianna's presence appeared, it immediately made the eyes of many divine kings narrow. Fear appeared in the depths of their eyes. "You want to stop me?" Ming Dong stepped through the air, advancing step by step. He glared at Jianna and said with a voice filled with killing intent, "You are indeed very powerful, but you still can't stop me from killing them. Ming Dong, if we start fighting, we obviously won't be able to avoid the collision of god artifacts. That will lead to the eruption of volcanoes in the entire space. At that time, there's probably not a single place on the 8th floor that's safe. Everyone will be affected. Do you really want to become the public enemy of all of us?" Jianna growled. Ming Dong's origins were still a mystery to him, so he was unwilling to clash with Ming Dong so easily. We've come here to find that little girl. If you continue fighting, won't you be getting in the way of all of us? Friend Ming Dong, I hope you can stop right now. If you want to fight, go somewhere else. Don't get in the way of all of us. At the same time, many powerful and rather conceited supreme divine kings spoke up to stop the battle. However, even more god kings retreated far away. They all arrived at the entrances to the 8th floor. They were prepared to leave as soon as the two of them began fighting. Let's go. Let's hide for now. This Ming Dong comes from the heavenly palace of Bishing. Don't offend him over something so trivial. A few supreme divine kings who knew about Ming Dong's origins retreated far away with their guards and retainers as soon as possible. Ming Dong and Jia Na were already on the verge of drawing their swords. They could clash at any moment. Ming Dong, don't be rash. At this moment, Shangwan Mu said. She looked at Ming Dong from afar, and her lips moved slightly. A voice that only Ming Dong could hear rang out. Ming Dong shuddered violently. He could not help but tremble gently. He arrived before Shangwan Mu in a flash and said excitedly, "Are you telling the truth? Then how did you know? I can sense it. Even though it's just a vague feeling, it can't be wrong. Don't forget that he still has that tower on him." Shangwan Mu did not say it aloud. Instead, she directly communicated with Ming Dong secretly. She was not afraid of others hearing it at all. Don't tell anyone about this for now. I heard that there's a very important little girl by Jinshan's side, and there are so many supreme divine kings gathered here who have specially come for the little girl. If you reveal it too early, it'll be detrimental to Jinshan. Fantastic, fantastic. Huh? Why didn't I think of that tower? If I've guessed correctly, that's my master's treasure. In the blink of an eye, the gloominess in Ming Dong's heart completely vanished. He was extremely excited, and his mood immediately improved. There was no shocking, baleful aura around him. At this moment, Ming Dong looked completely different. "Brother, since you're still here, then I'll wait here for you to come out. I'll leave the rest of your enemies to you." Ming Dong sat down cross-legged and swallowed several god tear pills in succession, calming his heart and regulating his breathing. He had paid a very great price to use Fate Sight to search for his enemies before going through several intense battles. Not only had he consumed a lot of energy, but he had even injured his core. Fortunately, as the 9th Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing, he possessed a large number of god tier pills. Making a full recovery was nothing difficult. On the other side, Jiana, Bai Yi, Gong Zheng, and Sanning all let out a sigh of relief when they saw Ming Dong finally stop. In the surroundings, the divine king who had hidden far away all returned when they saw Ming Dong finally stop. Very soon, they began making plans to enter the lava to search for the girl. Before long, peace returned to the 8th floor of the Poseidon Palace. However, everyone knew that this peace was only on the surface because the volcanoes on this floor were very unstable. They could erupt with the slightest provocation. Now that so many divine king had gathered, even if they concealed their presences, they would still affect the space here. They could break the balance at any time. Shangwan Mu sat in the air by herself. She was in no hurry to enter the 12th floor. Instead, she stared at the lava below eagerly, waiting for Jinshan to emerge. Shangwan Mu, I never thought you'd break through to the Divine King realm in such a short amount of time. You've really taken me by surprise. However, at this moment, a gentle voice rang out from beside Shangwan Mu. An alluring woman in a green dress stood beside Shangwan Mu as she smiled at her. Shangwan Mu was surprised. She had always been on guard, but she failed to sense the woman's approach at all. You are? Shangwan Mu stared at the unfamiliar woman in surprise and doubt. She had never seen this woman before, but she could sense a familiar presence from her. Chapter 2175. It's only been a few hundred years, yet you don't remember me? The woman maintained a gentle smile the entire time. It was enough to revive everything and make flowers bloom. Even the erupting volcanoes in the surroundings seemed to settle down slightly before her smile. Very soon, A thought flashed through Shangwan Mu's head when she sensed the familiar presence from the woman. She became surprised and asked, "You're the elven godtree for the elven race?" Back on the Tian Yuan continent, Shangwan Mu was familiar with the elven godtree. She had an extremely deep impression of it. This was because if the elven godtree had not taken action during the crisis of the world, it would have been impossible for that world to survive. I'm not a tree. When I was in the lower world, I used my remaining life force to condense a tree of life. I had no other choice, the woman chuckled gently. Shangwan Mu had already learned a few things about Aladona from Jianshan. Now that she had confirmed her identity, she immediately stood up and bowed towards Aladona, greeting her as senior. There's no need to call me senior. Although I'm much older than you, age doesn't determine status in the Saints world. Right now, we're both in the Divine King realm. Moreover, with your talent, it won't take you too long to surpass me. As a result, we can treat each other as equals. Of course, if you think highly of me, you can call me sister. We can treat each other as sisters, said Shangwan Mu. On the surface, she seemed calm, but in reality, she was not calm at all. This was all because Shangwan Mu's rate of cultivation had completely exceeded her expectations. Back when she left the Tian Yuan continent with the war god of the god clan, Taita, Shangwan Mu was only at the origin realm. Only a short while had passed, yet Shangwan Mu had already reached the Divine King realm. It was not just Shangwan Mu. Even Ming Dong nearby and Jianshan, who everyone discussed, had become Divine King experts in such a short amount of time. They progressed so quickly that it was truly astounding. Even Aladona, who had seen many supreme prodigies, was shocked. Speaking of which, it's quite a coincidence. I've come this time under the esteemed war god's orders to find Jianshan. The trip to the Neptunian Divine Palace is only for me to establish a network of connections so that I can make preparations for finding Jianshan in the future. But what I didn't expect was that not long after I entered the Azure Poseidon Palace, I actually heard news of Jianshan. I didn't expect that he would also come to the Azure Poseidon Palace. This is really a case of wearing out iron shoes in a fruitless search, only to find it by chance. Aladona sighed softly and sighed with emotion. The war god, Shangwan Mu, murmured softly. The war god is Taita. He's the supreme king of our god clan. Aladona could not help but show respect when the war god was mentioned. Their god clan was a rather special race. Although the god clan also followed the law of the jungle, with a strong ruled supreme, the war god was the only exception. The war gods of the divine race, also known as the war gods of the divine race, were born from the heavens and earth. In every generation, only one war god would appear. There would never be a scene where two war gods appeared at the same time. Every time the previous war god fell, the next war god would be born. However, without any exceptions, every war god would become a supreme existence as soon as they returned to the god clan, regardless of their cultivation. Even the hall elders who reigned supreme in the god clan would have to listen to the war god's orders. Everyone here is saying that Jianshan is already dead, but I know that Jianshan will never die here. Aladona looked at the lava below as she smiled faintly. Jianshan has that tower on him. As long as he hides in there, the mere lava won't be able to harm him at all. I think he's living more happily down there than anyone else. Adriana said softly. Aside from Shangwan Mu, there was no one else who could hear what she said. Sister, do you know the origins of that tower? Shangwan Mu stared at Aladona. She already knew that Jianshan's tower was extremely tough and of extremely high quality. However, Jianshan had never told anyone about the exact details of the tower. Aladona nodded. I wasn't certain about the tower when I was on the Tian Yuan continent. After returning to the Saints world, I looked through many records, and only then did I confirm it. Aladona suddenly became stern when she reached there. She said secretly, the tower is extremely important. The fewer people who know about it, the better. Otherwise, not only will Jianshan be killed, but all the people around Jianshan who have seen the tower will be doomed as well. Don't ask about the details. I know you won't tell anyone, But if you raise the attention of the peak experts of the Saints world, they have many methods to control the thoughts and wills of others. They can learn everything they want to know effortlessly. However, it's fortunate that basically all the people who can recognize the tower with a single glance are primordial realm experts. No one should be able to recognize the tower when Jianshun exposed it in Poseidon Palace. Systemur, let's go. Who knows when Jianshun will come out? There are fortuitous encounters everywhere in Poseidon Palace. I'll take you around first and see if I can increase your strength. Once Jianshun shows himself, there'll be a lot of bloodshed. Even with Ming Dong there, he might not be able to hold on. If you want to help him, you need to become stronger, or you'll just become a burden. Shangguan Mu and Aladona left the 8th floor. Ming Dong and the 5 divine generals remained there, silently waiting for Jianshun to appear. As for the divine king gathered on the floor, they had already formed groups of varying numbers. They used everyone's strength to unleash the full power of the god artifact as they began to search for Xiao Man in the lava. At this moment, Jianshun was happily collecting fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava where even god artifacts could be melted. Every time he cast his net, he would catch a small mountain of fire divine crystals, causing all the fire divine crystals in a large region to vanish. Jianshun moved as he collected them. He had already moved far away from his original position. Even he had no idea how many fire divine crystals there were in the Enata Tower now. He only knew that it was in the hundreds of millions. However, Jianshun was not satisfied. He knew that 100 million fire divine crystals was not a lot when converted to 5-color divine crystals, so he did not stop collecting fire divine crystals. However, at this moment, just when Jianshun was about to return to the Enata Tower with a large pile of fire divine crystals, the lava in the surroundings suddenly pulsed violently. A great sense of danger suddenly appeared, approaching him at an unbelievable speed. Jianshun's face changed. The sense of danger was so great that it was suffocating. It was extremely terrifying. Even his blood seemed to have frozen at that moment. Jianshun's face changed several times. Without any hesitation, he immediately abandoned the fire divine crystals he had just collected and returned to the Enata Tower as quickly as he could. Boom! As soon as Jianshun vanished, a great rumble rang out. The Enata Tower had suffered a powerful attack. Even Jianshun, who hid in the Enata Tower, could clearly sense the tower tremble gently through his connection with the tower. Jianshun was shocked. He had already refined the 5th floor of the Enata Tower, making it even more powerful than before. Let alone the Divine King, who wielded a god artifact. It could not shake it at all. He was confident that the Enata Tower could even withstand the attacks of some infinite primes. However, the Enata Tower actually trembled gently at this moment. Just how powerful was the attack that the Enata Tower had just endured? Chapter 2176. Jianshun stood at the entrance on the 1st floor of the Enata Tower. He looked outside through the damaged door as his face rapidly changed. He was surprised and doubtful. Even now, he struggled to believe that he had been attacked, and the attack was so powerful that it had completely surpassed the limits of the Divine King. The primordial realm experts were forbidden from entering the Azure Poseidon Palace. This rule had never been broken in the several million years since the palace had been opened. Moreover, he was at the very bottom of the lava. The temperature there was so great that even some god artifacts of lower quality would melt. Even some primordial realm experts would not be able to venture any deeper. Jianshun, what's happening? Kea appeared before Jianshun silently as he stared outside sternly. Jianshun shook his head silently. He was extremely stern. He had no idea who the attacker was. As a matter of fact, he was not even sure if he had been attacked by a living being or if he had accidentally come into contact with some formation, resulting in the formation's counterattack. Boom, boom, boom. However, at this moment, the terrifying attack arrived once again. It came from right in front of him, and every single strike possessed devastating power, causing the lava in the surroundings to churn violently. They struck the damaged Enata Tower heavily. The attacks were just too violent and too powerful. Even Jianshun, who hid in the Inata Tower, could clearly sense just how shocking the attacks outside were. The Inata Tower shook violently. Every single attack from the outside could shake the tower. After enduring the terrifying attacks, the Inata Tower began to shake violently. Afterwards, it lost its balance and began to tilt slowly, falling towards the ground. Jianshun could clearly sense every change in the Inata Tower. He did not try to stabilize the Inata Tower on purpose. Instead, he allowed it to fall. However, his heart had become heavy, and his complexion was very ugly. Now, he was certain that he had not come into contact with some formation. Instead, he had truly been attacked by an unknown enemy. However, what he did not understand was why the enemy was still able to remain in the Azure Poseidon Palace when they were so powerful. Boom! With a heavy sound, the collapsed Inata Tower struck the ground heavily with unimaginable weight. Immediately, the ground shook violently as if a great earthquake had occurred. Huge cracks spread out in all directions like a spider's web. The endless lava churned violently. At this moment, on the surface of the lava, there were balls of light that were slowly and cautiously making their way into the depths of the lava. Every single ball of light represented a defensive god artifact. Inside each ball of light were several dozen divine kings. They worked together to push the god artifact's defenses to the maximum to fend off the surrounding lava. At the bottom of the lava, it was indeed possible to melt a divine artifact, but the melting process would take a long time. As long as the divine kings did not reach the very bottom of the lava, they could indeed survive for some time under the power of the god artifacts. It was just that they would not be able to last for long. However, at this moment, the lava in the surroundings suddenly began to shake violently. Not only did the pressure on the divine kings immediately increase, but the flames that only existed at the bottom of the lava surged up as well. Enveloped by the flames, many of the barriers created by the god artifacts shattered in just a few seconds. As a result, the divine kings hiding underground were directly exposed to the lava. Immediately, miserable cries rang out from the lava. All the divine kings in the lava no longer dared to remain. As if they were fleeing for their lives, they all charged up as quickly as they could. Very soon, all the divine kings in the lava left. They all hovered in the air as they stared at the churning sea of lava below in lingering fear. In a short amount of time, many of them had become injured to varying degrees. Some of them had even been burned beyond recognition. Their entire bodies burned with surging flames. Their armor, which was clearly a supreme quality saint artifact, had been melted into a pool of liquid. What's going on down there? Why has the lava suddenly become so violent? Those flames are just too terrifying. They should only exist at the bottom of the lava, so why did they suddenly surge up? Many supreme divine kings hovered in the air as they stared at the sea of lava below in lingering fear. If it were not for the fact that they had fled quickly, they probably would not have survived even if they were supreme god kings on the god king's throne. They would have been burnt to a crisp. However, this incident had left a shadow in the hearts of many divine kings. For a moment, no one dared to go down again. The terrifying attack at the bottom of the lava had stopped. Jianshan hid in the Inata Tower and used his connection with the tower to sense the outside world. After confirming that the attack would not appear again, he slowly controlled the Inata Tower to float up and approach the lava carefully. After traveling a few kilometers, Jianshan's mind suddenly shuddered. He immediately controlled the Inata Tower to stop and calm down. He carefully sensed the surroundings before gritting his teeth and leaving the Inata Tower again, appearing at the bottom of the lava. However, this time, Jianshan appeared behind the Inata Tower. That way, even if the powerful attack came again, the indestructible Inata Tower would block it, giving him enough time to hide. However, as soon as Jianshan left the Inata Tower, his heart skipped a beat. His eyes immediately narrowed to the size of needles. Up ahead, he saw a huge head. At this moment, the head was almost stuck to the Inata Tower. Its eyes, which were 3 meters wide, stared at the Inata Tower without blinking. They were filled with surprise. "It's a lizard!" Jinshin's mind shuddered. He saw what it was with a single glance. It was actually a lizard that could survive at the bottom of the lava. However, it was also at this moment that the lizard sensed Jinshin's existence. Its huge eyes immediately locked onto Jinshin. Even though Jinshin was in the lava, he felt his body turn cold under the lizard's gaze. It was as if his entire body had stiffened. His blood seemed to have frozen as a suffocating sense of danger suddenly appeared. Jinshin had already made preparations to return to the Inata Tower at any time. Without any hesitation, he directly entered the Inata Tower with a flash. Boom! As soon as he entered the Inata Tower, it produced a heavy sound. Clearly, the lizard had launched a violent attack. Jinshin sucked in a few deep breaths within the Inata Tower. He looked outside and became extremely stern. This had completely overturned his understanding of the Poseidon Palace. He had never thought that there would actually be such a terrifying lizard at the bottom of the lava. No one had discovered it even after all these years. He was certain that if the news of the lizard spread through the Poseidon Palace, it would cause a huge uproar. "Jinshin, what's the situation outside?" Kea asked. Jinshin immediately told Kea everything he saw. As expected, Kea became stern after learning that there was an extraordinarily terrifying lizard outside. "With the lizard in the way, it'll be very difficult for you to collect fire divine crystals," Kea said with a frown. Chapter 2177. This floor is so large. Since there's a lizard here, I'll go somewhere else, Jinshin said before immediately retreating with the Inata Tower. He moved far away from the region in an attempt to avoid the lizard. The damaged Inata Tower moved through the lava silently like a ghost. Under Jinshin's control, it arrived several million kilometers away, basically arriving at the other end of the 8th floor. Only then did it stop. "It should be safe here," Jinshin murmured to himself. Through his connection with the Inata Tower, he secretly sensed the situation outside before leaving with a flash. "Be careful, just in case the lizard follows us," Kea said from behind as he showed some concern and worry. However, this time, Jinshin only left for a few seconds before returning to the Inata Tower with a sunken face. He said sternly, "The lizard is still outside. It's followed us all the way here. The obstructions at the bottom of the lava are just too great. I can't sense its existence in the tower at all." Jinshin was in a very bad mood. The lizard was hostile towards him, attacking him as soon as it saw him. Its attacks were devastating. It was so powerful that even some regular primordial realm experts would be slain in a single strike, let alone the Divine King. As a result, he was unable to collect fire divine crystals anymore. Fire divine crystals littered the ground outside, yet he was unable to collect any more. This would be a painful torture to anyone. Jinshin did not give up. He continued to move the Inata Tower through the lava, switching to several different locations. However, what made him exasperated was that no matter where he moved, the lizard remained fixated on him. More accurately, it was fixated on the Inata Tower. It followed the Inata Tower the entire time and struck the Inata Tower from time to time, causing it to tremble. "Looks like that giant lizard won't be leaving anytime soon. Forget it, since I can't go out, I'll go into seclusion here for a while." Jinshin sighed inside. He explained some matters to Kea before visiting Ziyun and Xiaoman. He then made his way to the 12th floor all by himself and entered seclusion. His comprehension of the way of the sword had already reached the major achievement of sword spirit, so he could condense the 3rd strand of profound sword chi. He had been busy collecting fire divine crystals before, so he naturally did not have the time to condense the 3rd strand of profound sword chi. Now that there was a terrifyingly powerful lizard standing guard outside, he was trapped in the Inata Tower, unable to leave. He could only spend his time cultivating. Jinshin had already condensed the profound sword chi twice, so he was already familiar with the process. Very soon, he entered the condensing process. While Jinshin was in seclusion, Kea, Ziyun, and Xiaoman did not sit around either. They all entered a state of cultivation. In particular, Xiao Man cultivated even more diligently after what had happened in the Poseidon Palace. Her talent was not weak, but because she was just too young and had not cultivated for a long time, she was only at the mortal realm. Now that she had made up her mind to cultivate arduously, coupled with the tremendous amount of cultivation resources from Ziyun, Xiao Man's rate of improvement could only be described as tremendous. Very soon, she broke through the mortal realm and reached sainthood. Ziyun had just obtained the legacy of a chaotic prime recently, so she used this rare moment of peace to absorb the legacy as quickly as she could. In the air above the sea of lava, the many god kings gathered there did not leave. Most of them were divine kings who had entered later. They had all come for the artifact spirit of the Poseidon Palace. Now that they had confirmed that Xiao Man was the key, they naturally would not give up on searching for her. However, the lava had not been peaceful recently. It would tremble violently from time to time, drawing out the flames at the bottom of the lava. As a result, they did not dare to go down so easily. They all waited for the moment when the lava completely calmed down. Time passed in a hurry. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. On this day, the entire space on the 12th floor of the Enita Tower suddenly became extremely bright. It was like a scorching sun hanging high in the sky, shining down with radiance. It illuminated the entire world. An extremely powerful sword intent radiated from the center of the 12th floor. Jianchun sat below a huge stone tablet there. A finger-sized strand of sword chi hovered above his head. It seemed to be filled with intelligence, revolving from time to time as it radiated with a chilling sword intent. At this moment, there was a flash of light, and the finger-sized strand of sword chi suddenly vanished. In a single moment, it had entered Jianchun's soul, settling down with 2 other strands of sword chi of the same size and appearance. Jianchun slowly opened his eyes as faint joy filled his face. After 3 years of seclusion, he had successfully condensed a 3rd strand of profound sword chi. He could clearly sense that the power of the 2 strands of sword chi before him had increased slightly the moment he condensed the 3rd strand of sword chi. Afterwards, he looked at the huge stone tablet beside him. The stone tablet was the core of the Enita Tower. Only by completely refining the stone tablet could he truly control the Enita Tower. I wonder if I can refine the 6th floor with my current strength. Jianchun stared at the stone tablet as he murmured inside. After a moment of thought, he placed his hands on the stone tablet firmly and attempted to refine the 6th floor. However, he soon gave up. Refining the 6th layer was thousands of times more difficult than refining the 5th layer. After a series of attempts, he realized that even if his cultivation improved, he might not be able to refine the 6th layer, let alone refining it with his current cultivation level. It looks like I can only try it once my cultivation reaches the level of an infinite prime, Jianchun sighed softly. With a thought, he vanished from the 12th floor. When he reappeared, he was already on the 1st floor, appearing beside Kea silently. He did not leave the Enita Tower to check whether the lizard was still there or not. Although he had been refining profound sword chi in seclusion for the past 3 years, his senses toward the Enita Tower had not weakened at all. He could clearly sense that the Enita Tower would shake violently from time to time. Chapter 2178. Every time the Cerulean Poseidon Palace opened, it would only last for 10 years. Half of the 10 years had already passed, so Jianchun knew that it would probably be very difficult for him to collect fire divine crystals in the coming days. He turned his head slightly and gazed into the distance. When he saw the mountainous pile of fire divine crystals, he immediately calmed down slightly. He knew that there would not be a lot of 5-color divine crystals if he exchanged these fire divine crystals for them. However, at the very least, it would be enough for him to take a few interplanar teleportation formations. You've emerged. Kea slowly opened his eyes and looked at Jianchun beside him. He continued, "Do you need me for something?" Jianchun nodded and laughed dryly in a rather unnatural manner. "The lizard is still guarding outside, so I can't leave either. I can only stay here." "All right, Kea, I see that you seem to have some understanding of the use of laws. The same laws of fire and laws of destruction are used by you, yet they are extraordinarily powerful, far exceeding your current level of cultivation. May I ask how you managed to do that? Jianshin had become curious about Keia's use of laws very early on. If his grasp and usage of the laws of the sword could reach the same level as Keia's usage of the laws of fire and laws of destruction, his battle prowess would rise to a whole new level. Although he had stayed at the bottom of the lava for several years now, so he had no idea about the situation in the cerulean Poseidon Palace, it was not difficult for him to guess. He knew that since the 8 divine kings and the many spectating divine kings knew about Xiao Man, it was impossible to keep it a secret. Perhaps everyone knew about Xiao Man's mysteries now. However, Xiao Man was by his side. Unless he gave up on Xiao Man, he would come into conflict with all the divine kings sooner or later once he left. He would not be able to deal with such a situation with his chaotic body that had just broken through to the 12th layer. As a result, he urgently needed to increase his strength. I don't know exactly how I did it. It's just a feeling. She slowly raised her right hand and said, Jianshin, I'll slow down the speed at which I condense the laws. I'll show you. With that, Keia began to slowly condense the power of the laws of destruction. This time, the speed at which she condensed the laws was extremely slow. People could clearly sense the omnipresent power of laws gathering towards her finger from all directions, slowly condensing into a ball of destructive power of laws. Jinshin's eyes narrowed. He discovered that Keia's process of condensing the laws was not much different from the other divine kings. There was nothing special about it, but when the laws of destruction were condensed in her hands, they were clearly purer than the other divine kings. It felt like Keia was not just an early divine king, but a late divine king. This was because the laws of destruction she had condensed were so powerful that they were definitely on par with the late divine king. Laws are also a form of power. Using this power requires skill as well, Jianshin said softly, as she said that the laws of destruction condensed between her fingers silently changed shape. It was no longer a form of pure power. Instead, it gradually turned into a rune. As soon as the rune was formed, it immediately gave off a terrifying pulse that made even Jianshin shiver. He could sense a great threat from the rune, one that was no weaker than the supreme divine kings he had clashed with in the past. I'll show you a few more times. I don't know how to pass on this method to you accurately, so this is all I can do right now. Keia dispersed the laws of destruction on her hand and condensed them again using the same steps. Not only was Jianshin the person Keia trusted the most, but he was also her best friend, the only person she was most familiar with. As a result, she held nothing back from Jianshin. She passed on everything she knew to him, trying it over and over again tirelessly. Jianshin slowly closed his eyes and opened his mind. He sensed every single step and detail of Keia's method of condensing the laws of destruction. He wanted to understand the mysteries behind it so that he could increase his comprehension of the laws of the sword. Gradually, Jianshin entered a state of selflessness. In his hazy state, he felt like he was submerged in an ocean filled with the laws of destruction, being tightly wrapped around. Not only did he not feel threatened or uneasy in the ocean of the laws of destruction, but he instead felt warm, like an infant in his mother's embrace. Furthermore, he felt as if he wanted to fuse his entire body into the ocean. He wanted to become a part of the ocean, a drop of water in the ocean. At the same time, a faint power of the laws of destruction silently condensed around Jianshin, revolving around Jianshin. Keia stared at Jianshin in shock as she sat opposite Jianshin. She murmured, he's actually comprehended the laws of destruction. After who knew how long, Jianshin finally roused from the wondrous state. As soon as he roused, he immediately sensed the changes that had occurred to him. Not only could he clearly sense the omnipresent power of the laws of the sword that filled the surroundings, but he could also sense the power of the laws of destruction. Jianshin was surprised. He immediately attempted to condense the power of the laws of destruction. As expected, as soon as he willed it, the laws of destruction rapidly gathered. I've grasped the laws of destruction? Jianshun was filled with disbelief. He originally wanted to understand the mysteries of Keia's usage of the laws through her, but he had never thought that he would successfully comprehend the laws of destruction. Keia, how long did it take me? Jianshun asked nervously. He was immersed in a wondrous state where he had forgotten everything. He could not sense the flow of time at all. He was afraid that he had taken too long to comprehend the laws of destruction. Half a year. Only half a year? That's good. That's good. Jianshun exhaled in relief. He finally stopped worrying. Master, the way of the sword is your main focus. You have to focus on the way of the sword. Only then can you reach the peak in the shortest amount of time possible. The voices of the sword spirits rang out in Jianshun's head. Jianshun's comprehension of the laws of destruction worried the two sword spirits. They were afraid that it would slow down Jianshun's progress in the way of the sword. Ziying and Qing Suo understood that Jianshun would comprehend many laws sooner or later, but they were more willing to see Jianshun comprehend many laws after he had become an expert who could shake up an entire region. By then, there would not be a lot of people who could threaten Jianshun. He would be able to comprehend many laws without any worries. It would not be like right now, filled with danger at all times. The slightest carelessness could lead to his death. Please listen to Xiaoyao's Prestige. Once there are any updates in the future, Xiaoyao will inform you through Prestige. Search Xingxing Ciao 110. It's not complicated. It's Xiaoyao's pseudonym and a phone number. You can also find it by searching for Xiaoyao's pseudonym. To read the latest novel without error, please visit Chapter 2179. Ziying, Qing Suo, don't worry. I won't disappoint you. Jianshun secretly communicated with the sword spirits. Even though comprehending the laws of destruction was only an accident, Jianshun did not regret it at all. This was because comprehending two laws would definitely make his battle prowess much greater than comprehending a single law. The only flaw was that he had only just comprehended the laws of destruction. His usage and comprehension of the laws of destruction remained at a rudimentary level. However, Jianshun believed that he would be able to raise his comprehension of the laws of destruction to the level of the Divine King before too long. At that time, he would be able to use both the laws of the sword and the laws of destruction. Coupled with the strength of his chaotic force, his battle prowess would undoubtedly rise to a whole new level. My comprehension of the laws of destruction has almost reached the mid-Divine King. Jianshun, you've only just comprehended the laws of destruction, so your usage of the laws of destruction is still at a rudimentary level. I'll inscribe my own comprehension and help you increase your comprehension of the laws of destruction, Keia said. She found a tough stone slab and slowly closed her eyes. Immediately, a powerful presence radiated from her body. Her hair fluttered without any wind as the power of the laws of destruction silently condensed around Keia. In Keia's head, her comprehension of the laws of destruction, from the very beginning to her current level of the Divine King, rapidly flashed through like scenes. In the end, it condensed into a profound imprint that contained endless laws on her finger. As soon as the imprint formed, the laws of destruction around Keia immediately began to violently pulse as if they had been greatly disturbed. They became extremely unstable. At this moment, Keia's gaze suddenly became extremely sharp. With a deep bellow, the imprint that had condensed in her hand immediately shot out as a black streak of light, striking the stone slab. There was no deafening roar, nor was there any terrifying destructive power. Keia's seemingly astonishing attack was only loud as thunder, but small as raindrops. It only left an incomparably clear and mysterious mark on the stone wall. Soon after, Keia's body swayed and he staggered, almost falling to the ground. His face was somewhat pale, and there was a hint of weakness between his brows. It was obvious that this attack had taken a huge toll on her. Keia, why do you have to do this? Jianshun immediately arrived in front of Keia, full of concern. He immediately took out several recovery-type medicinal pills and fed them to Keia. He naturally knew what Keia had done. He had done the same to the Tianyuan family in the past. He had used the same method to leave behind a scar that contained the mysteries of the way of the sword for Shiyu. This method was called imparting. It was the method of imparting one's comprehension of laws in the clearest and simplest way possible for others to comprehend. Although this method could allow others to comprehend the mysteries of the laws in the easiest way possible, not only was it extremely taxing on the user, but it was also extremely risky. The slightest carelessness could harm the soul. Furthermore, not everyone would be able to benefit from the Tao imparting imprint. The Tao imparting imprint merely displayed the great Tao of heaven and earth in the clearest and most direct manner. Whether one could grasp it or not still depended on one's comprehension ability. As a result, even some masters and disciples would not leave behind imprints like this so easily in the saint's world, regardless of whether it could achieve the desired result. Just the risk involved was enough to make many experts shrink back. I can't describe the method of using laws, nor can I find an accurate method to impart it to you. Now that you've comprehended the laws of destruction, all I can help you with is leaving behind a seed of my comprehension of the laws of destruction, Kea said tiredly. With that, she immediately sat down and began to recuperate. Jianshun looked at the pale-faced Kea with mixed feelings. He sighed gently before focusing his attention on the imprint Kea had left behind. He sent his mind into the imprint to comprehend the mysteries of the laws within. Jianshun became completely immersed in it very soon. His talent had always been extraordinary, so with the assistance of the imprint, his comprehension of the laws of destruction increased extremely quickly. It basically improved at all times. Mid-deity, late deity, early deity, mid-deity. At this moment, Jianshun's comprehension of the laws of destruction skyrocketed. It progressed so quickly that it was simply astounding. Master's perception is so strong that it's even more powerful than I thought. Of course. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for Master to comprehend the way of the sword so early on the Tianyuan continent. Although he used the comprehension tea tree back then, Master's cultivation was just too low back then. He was nowhere near the minimum requirement to comprehend the way of the sword. In my opinion, no matter how great Master's comprehension abilities and talent were back then, it would have been impossible for him to comprehend the way of the sword with the comprehension tea tree, yet Master did it. The sword spirits secretly sighed in amazement as well. Even though they knew that it was all because of the imprint, it also indirectly proved Jianshun's talent. At the same time, over 1,000 divine kings gathered on the 12th floor of the Azure Poseidon Palace. They sat around the 3 huge statues quietly. All of them had their eyes closed as they sat there, using their minds to comprehend the 3 statues. The divine kings of the Yun family gathered in an inconspicuous corner of the crowd as well. However, their numbers had decreased once again compared to a few years ago. There were only 5 of them left. Xian, your fortune is great. You obtained a spiritual root of heavenly ways as soon as you entered the Azure Poseidon Palace. Reaching Chaotic Prime won't be a problem for you. You have to grasp this opportunity right now and properly comprehend it. See if you can obtain the recognition of one of the statues. The legacy of one of the 4 statues has already been taken away. As long as you obtain the recognition of any one of the remaining 3, not only will you be able to break free from the Sky Empire, but you'll even have the chance to avenge Jianshun, Yun Lianqing said to Yun Lianqing. Yun Lianqing said to Yun Xian, who sat beside him secretly. Even though he knew that obtaining the legacy here was just a fantasy, he still held some hope. Yun Xian opened her eyes. She glanced at the 5th prince, Mr. Shu, and the others nearby and nodded slightly. The 5th prince of the Sky Empire was communicating with Mr. Shu via voice transmission as well. Mr. Shu, let's stay here for the next period of time. We'll leave with the group when the Azure Poseidon Palace closes. There are a few extremely powerful divine kings on the 12th floor. Even if Ming Dong comes here, he won't be able to gain anything. You're worrying too much, 5th prince. Ming Dong probably doesn't know that I've moved against Jianshun. After all, it's rumored that only the 8 divine kings took part in the encirclement against Jianshun. I wasn't included. Looks like I'm not a divine king, so I've been overlooked by many people," Mr. Shu said secretly. "So what if Ming Dong knows about this? Don't forget that we found a life star core in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Every single life star core comes from the core of a planet filled with life. It's extremely rare, and it contains extremely terrifying life energy. It's a treasure that cultivators who cultivate the way of life can only come across by chance," the fifth prince said confidently. "Fifth prince, you want to—" Mr. Shu was surprised as he glanced into the distance. At the place where Mr. Shu was looking, there was an empty space where no one dared to step into. Only two women with extraordinary temperaments were sitting cross-legged inside. It was as if this vast, open space had become the exclusive territory of these two women. One of the two women wore a violet dress, and her face was covered by a veil. A simple zither was placed across her knees. She did not try to comprehend the statue like everyone else in an attempt to obtain the recognition of the Grand Prime's legacy. Instead, she focused all of her attention on the zither. The other woman was wearing a long green dress. Her appearance was enough to cause the downfall of countries and cities. She was indescribably beautiful. Mr. Shu didn't look at the veiled woman in a violet dress, and his gaze had converged onto the woman in a green dress instead. His face carried a wisp of terror and deep fear that was impossible to conceal. Although the green-clothed woman had concealed all of her presence, making her seem like nothing special, her strength was deeply engraved in the minds of all the god kings on the floor. This was because when the woman in green had first arrived on this floor, she had clashed with a woman in silver-white armor. Although it was only a single clash, the destructive might made all the divine kings wonder whether a battle between primordial realm experts had taken place. To no surprise, the law that the woman in green comprehended was the laws of life. To read the latest novel, please visit the website. Chapter 2180. It was also because of that clash that all the god kings on the 12th floor clearly understood the strength of the two women. They understood just how shocking they were. As a matter of fact, without any exaggeration, all the other divine kings gathered on the 12th floor of Poseidon Palace behaved themselves with the two of them present. They no longer dared to make their own rules. That's right. If we really have to, we'll offer up the Life Star Core. Although the Life Star Core is precious, it's only unimaginable to experts who practice the laws of life. There just happens to be an expert like that here. I think it shouldn't be difficult for us to use a Life Star Core as a reward to get this expert to stop Ming Dong for us. Although Ming Dong has a great background and has killed several divine kings consecutively without fear of the organizations behind them seeking revenge, we're only asking the Supreme Divine King, who has grasped the laws of life, to help us stop Ming Dong. It's not like we're actually asking her to fight Ming Dong to the death. I think she'll agree. The fifth prince said to Mr. Shu secretly, as if he was extremely confident. Mr. Shu also felt that the fifth prince was very reasonable. He immediately relaxed and said, "If that's the case, we don't have to worry about whether Ming Dong will find out about us or not. Ming Dong is so powerful that it's indeed very difficult for us to fend him off in the Azure Poseidon Palace. However, once he leaves the Azure Poseidon Palace, the primordial realm experts of my sky empire will receive him. It'll be a piece of cake for him to leave if he wants to. I'm just very curious about the identities of the woman in the green dress and the woman in white armor in the distance. Who are they in the top 10 of the Divine King's throne? They're actually so terrifying. However, there are so many people here, yet no one seems to be able to recognize the two of them. Otherwise, we only need to know their names, and we'll be able to determine their rankings immediately." Mr. Shu's gaze swept across the crowd, occasionally glancing at the two peerlessly beautiful women. While his heart was filled with fear, it was also filled with curiosity. In reality, they were not the only ones who were curious about the two women. Basically, all the divine kings in the entire Azure Poseidon Palace paid close attention to the two of them. Obviously, the battle between the two of them had left an indelible impression in everyone's hearts. Among the two peerless women who were the center of attention, one of them was Adriana. At this moment, Aladona had concealed all of her presence. She sat beside Shangguan Mu, but like an ordinary person, ignoring the gazes of the people and the surroundings. Occasionally, when her gaze swept past the dense crowd and saw a graceful figure in silver-white battle armor sitting cross-legged on the ground by herself in the distance, her calm gaze clearly contained an unconcealable fury and hatred. Shui, Yun, Lan. Aladona's face sank as she gritted her teeth and muttered those 3 words inside. Even with her magnanimous heart, when facing the woman in white armor, it was still difficult for her to maintain her calm and indifferent attitude. There was a very, very deep hatred. This was because the woman was her former enemy, one of the 4 protectors of the Ice Goddess Hall, Shui Yunlan. At this moment, Shangwan Mu looked around and looked at Aladona beside her. She asked, "Sister, is your grievance with her really that deep?" Aladona sucked in a deep breath and said slowly, "Sister Mu, you don't understand Shui Yunlan. You don't know just how many things Shui Yunlan committed that infuriated people back on the Tian Yuan continent. Not only did she seal up an entire world and prevent anyone from entering the Saints' world, but she even personally carried out a great slaughter, wiping out an entire era in that world." Adriana looked at Shangwan Mu and continued, "Do you know why the histories of the Tian Yuan continent, the Beast God continent, the Sea Realm, and the Wasteland continent are only around 1,000,000 years old at the longest? As for the earlier period of history, it was completely blank. There were no records at all. That's because Shui Yunlan's blood-soaked hands erased all the records of the earlier eras. Countless sainthood and origin realm cultivators have died to her hands, including people from our god clan. It's just that what makes me feel helpless is that Shui Yunlan is just too powerful. I can't stop her, and she possesses a treasure bestowed upon her by the Ice Goddess, one of the 7 grand exalts. Even the laws of the lower world are unable to do anything to her." As soon as she mentioned the past, Aladona felt uncontrollable anger. Her hatred for Shui Yunlan was extremely deep, so her gaze towards Shui Yunlan became sharper and sharper. "Aladona, there's no need to look at me like that. You may have settled down for over 3 million years in the lower world, making you far more powerful than before, making you one of the top 10 figures of the Divine King, but you're still not my opponent." Perhaps because she sensed Aladona's sharper gaze, Shui Yunlan's cold, emotionless voice rang out from afar. She spoke to Aladona secretly, so, aside from Aladona, even Shangwan Mu could not hear anything. "Aladona, I have no intentions of fighting with you. I hope you can control yourself. You should know the difference between you and me right now. I can let bygones be bygones, but if it happens again, I'll make you pay the price." Shui Yunlan's icy voice rang out clearly. Her voice was filled with disdain towards Aladona. She did not take her seriously at all. "Shui Yunlan, you sure are confident. I really do want to see if your current strength is really as tough as you sound, where you can look down on me like that." Aladona refused to back down and replied with a sneer. When she first entered the 12th floor of the Poseidon Palace, the reason why she did not continue fighting with Shui Yunlan was not because she feared Shui Yunlan. Instead, it was because she knew that once she engaged in an intense battle with Shui Yunlan, the terrifying shockwaves of energy would harm many innocent people. Even Shangwan Mu would probably be unable to avoid it. As a result, she was forced to stop fighting with Shui Yunlan out of consideration for Shangwan Mu. As for Shui Yunlan, she clearly had no interest in clashing with Adriana either, so they both stopped after clashing once. I'm just very curious. With Shui Yunlan's level of cultivation, you can reach the primordial realm at any time, so why haven't you broken through yet, remaining as a divine king? Moreover, you've appeared on the 12th floor of the Poseidon Palace. What makes me even more confused is that you actually want to obtain the Grand Prime's legacy here." Adriana looked at Shui Yunlan mysteriously as her lips curled into a strange smile. She continued, "The organization behind you is the Ice Goddess Hall, a place that possesses one of the 7 grand exalts of the Saints' world, the Supreme Ice Goddess. Do you really think the legacy of the Taoist sect of Neptunia is enough for you? Moreover, according to my knowledge, the cultivation methods of your Ice Goddess Hall are all related to ice without any exception. Since when have the people of your ice goddess hall taken an interest in cultivation methods that have nothing to do with ice? P.S. Please listen to Xiaoyao's message. Once there are any updates or changes, Xiaoyao will inform you through the message. Search Xingxing Ciao 110. It was not complicated. It was Xiaoyao's pseudonym and a police number.